בחרמון נמס השלג בחצי הלילה, בחרמון זורם לו פלג בחצי הליל. אבא שם על הר השלג בחצי הלילה, שר שירים על נס בפלא עם כל ישראל. האביב שוב צוהל ואיתי משתולל, איזה לילה, איזה לילה, איזה לילה, איזה ליל. האביב שוב צוהל ואיתי משתולל, איזה לילה, איזה לילה, איזה לילה, איזה ליל. בבקעת תמר פורח בחצי הלילה, הירח שם זורח בחצי הליל. שם אחי ודאי שומע בחצי הלילה את שירנו השמח כאן בישראל. האביב שוב צוהל ואיתי משתולל, איזה לילה, איזה לילה, איזה לילה, איזה ליל. האביב שוב צוהל ואיתי משתולל, איזה לילה, איזה לילה, איזה לילה, איזה ליל. במדבר הולך החושך בחצי הלילה, שקט הס בארץ גושן בחצי הליל. לדודי עיני נחושת בחצי הלילה, וגם הוא חוגג כמו שכל בית ישראל. האביב שוב צוהל ואיתי משתולל, איזה לילה, איזה לילה, איזה לילה, איזה ליל. האביב שוב צוהל ואיתי משתולל, איזה לילה, איזה לילה, איזה לילה, איזה ליל. ואני יושב בבית בחצי הלילה, עם נרות וגביע יין בחצי הליל, וכוכב מאיר עיניים בחצי הלילה, לי מוסר ברכת שמיים ולכל ישראל. האביב שוב צוהל ואיתי משתולל, איזה לילה, איזה לילה, איזה לילה, איזה ליל. האביב שוב צוהל ואיתי משתולל, איזה לילה, איזה לילה, איזה לילה, איזה ליל. שוב צוהל.
Прийшли окупанти до нас в Україну, форма новенька, воєнні машини, та трохи поплавився їх інвентар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Російські танкісти сховались в кущі, щоб лаптем посьорбати довбані щі, та трохи у чах перегрівся навар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Приперли зі сходу до нас барани для восстановлення
великої страни.
Найкращий пастух баранячих отар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Їх доводи всяке озброєння різне, потужні ракети, машини залізні, у нас на всі доводи є коментар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Вони захопити хотіли нас зразу, а ми зачаїли на орків образу з російських бандитів, робить примар. Байрактар, Байрактар.
Future
Yes.
The Leaf Spring Army sends its regards.
Hello, everyone. I'm the Enforcer, and I'm accompanied by Enforcer Matt.
And good evening, folks. It's Enforcer Matt, and welcome back to day 1005 of the news. And it's good to see you all once again. And today, we've heard Ukraine's destroyed a $500 million Russian weapon system, an S-400, in a very large attack. And also, of course, it is the Sunday night fundraiser stream. And tonight is another great night to raise money for a great Ukrainian charity. And it's good to see you all once again.
And, of course, we're going to be covering the past 24 hours of the news of the war in Ukraine and also news of the ongoing conflict inside of Lebanon, as we have an incredibly large amount of news tonight from both areas. Before I even begin the summary, though, I do want to remind everyone that tonight is the famous Sunday night fundraiser. And what better organization to fundraise for than Revive Soldiers of Ukraine, a nonprofit that helps to bring Ukrainian soldiers pretty much back from the grave nearly, and it's an absolutely amazing nonprofit that we've been supporting for years at this point here on this channel. We have a $3,000 goal, and hopefully the LSA will make it to the fundraiser goal, because the LSA has never missed a fundraiser goal in its entire history. But moving on from that little shout out for the fundraiser tonight and on into the actual breaking news that we have massive news coming from every single corner of the world today, at least in the area of the Middle East and Eastern Europe, as we were able to hear massive news that a Ukrainian attack has ended up striking and critically damaging a Russian oil depot in the city of Kaluga, an incredibly deep strike inside of the Russian Federation compared to strikes that we've been seeing previously, and not only that, around 70 miles away from the outer ring of the city of Moscow, a fairly significant attack, and once again beginning a tried and true Ukrainian strategy of knocking out Russian oil reserves and supplies right when the Russian Federation needs them the most during the valuable winter months, where heat is not really a easy thing to find, at least within the Russian climate, and the Russian energy infrastructure is consuming a far greater deal of fuel than ever seen before.
I'll tell you what, every single day, Russia's becoming more reliant on Ukraine to deliver the heat. And I tell you what, Ukraine is delivering that heat for sure, man. They are launching attack after attack on the Russian mainland these days.
Man, and it is absolutely crazy. And speaking of losing some oil, maybe even bringing the heat, we've been able to hear that a Russian Sukhoi superjet has ended up landing in Antalya today inside of Turkey and ended up going up into a blaze of fire. We are not exactly sure what caused the fire at the moment, but it does appear that the Russian aviation's technical industry is once again starting to show some buckling and failures, as it appears that most Russian aircraft are being poorly maintained and spontaneously combusting in the modern day. Not exactly a good thing for your average passenger airline. But moving on from that and down into the Middle East, we have been able to get major news once again from the area of Israel and Lebanon, as we have been able to hear that Hezbollah has tried to conduct an incredibly large attack against the state of Israel, with hundreds of rockets being fired today. The Israelis were capable and largely successful in shooting down a decent amount of these incoming Qassam rockets, but nevertheless, some of them did end up landing around the areas of Antalya, as well as just the area of northern Acre. We do understand that the Israelis are immediately responding with airstrikes on Dahiya within Beirut, as they are still continuing to try and knock out Hezbollah and IRGC command posts that are still based inside of the capital city of Lebanon. Meanwhile, the Israeli ground operation is still continuing on, largely like clockwork from what we understand, although there is absolutely no video and picture evidence to ever back that up at all, quite literally ever, because the Israelis hardly ever put out any video or picture evidence of their ground operations inside of southern Lebanon. However, we were also able to hear that while this was going on inside the Middle East, we were also seeing that heavy frontline activity was happening inside of Ukraine today. We were also able to get a little bit of info on the air defense report from last night, as the Russian Federation did launch another drone attack, an incredibly large one, into the skies of Ukraine, and around out of 75 of the drones that were launched, around 52 of them were shot down, meaning that the interception rate was somewhere around 65 to 70% last night. Not that bad, but still largely within the average that we've been seeing over the past few months. Meanwhile, inside the Kursk Oblast, heavy fighting has continued, as the Russian Federation is throwing just about all of their offensive abilities that they have left to muster against the Ukrainian defensive forces inside of the area around Suja. It appears that the Ukrainians are not being uprooted and pushed back from their positions at the moment, and the Russians on film have been once again taking fairly high casualties over that past 24-hour period. Meanwhile, the Russian Federation is also continuing their battles around the area of Seversk, Chasiv Yar, and Pokrovsk, as well as Kurakovi as a part of the southern Pokrovsk front line, and it appears that they are taking very high losses in all areas and taking very little ground, if any, in most of these front lines. Today has been a fairly interesting day. It's as far as the frontline fighting is concerned, both inside of the state of Israel, as the skies over northern Israel largely can be considered a front line these days, and not only that in Ukraine. But one thing that we've gotten that is incredibly important is some actual ascertainable data and information that we can use to talk about the Oreshnik missile strike that occurred on the city of Dnipro and the exact damage that the reentry vehicles caused when they slammed down into the city. We were able to find the exact location of the MIRV reentries, and we were also able to find the amount of damage that they caused being used in a kinetic form. Nevertheless, we have loads and loads of news today. And of course, I cannot plug enough the amazing fundraiser that we have tonight, Revive Soldiers of Ukraine. We've already hit about $700 or so on it, and hopefully we'll be hitting that $3,000 goal here very soon. But moving on
yes, indeed. And also, Enforcer, by the way, we've got an absolute full house in here tonight. Already 9,000 people, and we're only like 10 minutes into the stream. So that's crazy as well, and hopefully we will smash that $3,000 goal very quick.
And hopefully we will. And also, I got to say, welcome again to everyone tonight, because it looks like it's going to once again be an absolutely crazy night of viewership. But moving on into the area of Russia, and specifically the Kaluga Oblast, we must move on down into the city of Kaluga, a city that has not really been talked about a lot on this channel, as it's never really been in the news cycles. The Kaluga Oblast, if any oblast within the Western Russian Federation qualifies for this, while I sound like Porky Pig right there, would be Kaluga. It's a fairly inactive oblast, at least as far as our news coverage, and not really a lot happens here on a day-to-day basis. There is a lot, however, that always happens in the Tula Oblast, the Bryansk Oblast, Kursk, and sometimes Oryol, but Kaluga very rarely ever makes it onto a news cycle on this channel, and for fairly good reason. There just isn't really a lot in Kaluga. There's a lot in Bryansk, a lot in Kursk, a lot in Tula, just not much in Kaluga from what we understand. It's mostly a fairly empty oblast, and a lot of their industry does revolve more so around raw materials production, such as timber. One can tell by the massive amount of forests that exist within this oblast, but most specifically, the town of Kaluga itself is a fairly smaller one, at least compared to the surrounding towns such as Kursk, which have populations nearly twice the size. Nevertheless, even though Kaluga is smaller, every single town in the Russian Federation has an oil depot, just like every single town in America has a McDonald's. The Russian Federation largely lives on their oil production abilities, and economically, it is incredibly important for them to be able to produce a large amount of crude oil, especially for export. But one thing that the Russian Federation does not have is a large amount of usable fuel products, or at least a ability to produce that. And for this reason, any oil depots that exist within the Russian Federation are usually a high priority target for the Ukrainians, as destroying these usable fuel products that are stored within these depots largely ensures that the Russian Federation will always be running out of usable fuel products. And this is something that has been a very under-talked about, but very important part of the war that the Ukrainians are weighing out logistically. And we also believe that this is why the Russians are really beginning to panic and freak out when considering this phase of the war and them firing off IRBMs and such things into Ukraine. The Russian Federation, like every modern country, largely exists on its usable fuel reserves. And the Russian Federation is one, like any other, that largely relies on oil. A lot of their power grid is oil-based. A lot of their vehicles are oil-based, or really some form of petroleum-based product. The Russian Federation will live and die on oil products, much like any other country in the modern day will. The problem with that, however, is that from what we understand, even still to this day, around 15% of all Russian oil refineries have been knocked out of action even at this moment. While some of them have still been repaired and brought online, the Ukrainians have been able to ensure that enough are knocked out at any given moment that 15% of Russian oil production, or at least fuel production out of their oil, is knocked out on a day-to-day basis. This is a fairly big deal, because every single day that this war goes on, the Russians are burning about 700,000 barrels of usable fuel products that they are not able to replace at this point due to a lack of operational refineries. And so, interestingly enough, while the Russian Federation, compared to other times historically, is pumping the largest amount of oil out of their nation at this moment, they are actually producing the smallest amount of usable fuel products that has ever been seen simultaneously. So a large amount of the oil that they are producing, they can't really do anything with it at all. And this has led to an even larger financial crisis inside of Russia, where Russia is having to purchase fuel sources from outside of their country, such as gasoline and other forms of fuel products, to be able to try and keep Russia running, because otherwise they are going to start dwindling down their usable fuel supply to the point that it's non-existent. And if that happens, the economy will quite literally collapse. The Russian Federation's agricultural industry is incredibly mechanized, meaning that if oil runs out, the price of food inside of Russia is going to begin to skyrocket, and agricultural output will drop to pretty much almost nothing, considering that there is no usable labor force big enough in Russia that works in agriculture at this point to really take up the slack that would be seen from the absolute stoppage of the Russian agricultural industry. Another thing that will also pretty much cease as well is the war itself on the ground, as the Russian Federation would not even have enough usable fuel at that point to be able to keep the conflict running. And we'll probably see, because of that, they will begin to prioritize fuel shipments to the Russian army instead of the Russian public or the private sector, and for this reason, the Russian economy would practically implode overnight, along with the agricultural industry. Pretty much anything that is not the military would implode, because there would be a complete lack of transportation abilities to keep anything running at that point. For this reason, the Russian Federation and Ukraine understand the priority and importance of the Russian oil depots that have usable fuel products inside of them, and one of the larger ones in the area is actually in Kaluga. It's one of the few things that actually makes the entire Kaluga Oblast interesting, is that it has a couple of oil depots that are within range of Ukrainian long-range drones. And the Ukrainians ended up slamming one down into one of the oil depots at Kaluga, and it appears that that thing was smoking.
Man, that's a big Kaluga of a fire right there, I'm telling you what.
And listen to those sirens purr.
And look at that smog, man. Those Russians, I'll tell you what, they're getting used to pretty much breathing smog at this point with all these attacks in these depots of oil and things like that and these refineries. It's just like the breathing's getting tougher in Russia. You can't afford to live and you can't breathe.
Man, dude, Russian ads, like Russian anti-smoking ads are like, do you know what's in a cigarette? Tar. Don't be a douchebag. Get your tar by just breathing in the air like everyone else. Or something like that.
They're trying to compete with their buddy China for worst air quality.
Dude, right now, man, the Chinese are like, finally, someone is taking the worst air pollution record over us. Thank God. Like, they're legitimately probably doing that at this point because the fires are quite significant. And I also want to let y'all see that this person is in one of the larger high-rises within the city of Kaluga. And we're really going to quickly try and geolocate this. So we can see here that they're in a couple of the taller buildings within Kaluga city itself. So let's take a look here, because it looks as though they were looking towards the industrial area of town, which would actually be towards the northern side. So I'm trying to find really quickly some of the taller buildings within Kursk. This would actually be one of them. And let's see here. It looked as though the fire was coming from somewhere up in this area. Where is the oil depot? I'm sure we can find it if we spend some time looking. I'm not going to spend too much. Here we go. There it is. There's the oil depot. We found it. This is one of the larger, more significant ones that at least, and also I want to make this clear, there is a really big difference in between a lot of the Russian oil depots that hold crude oil and then the oil depots that actually just hold usable fuel products. And from what we understand, this is one of the ones that holds usable fuel products and is used to supply a large area of the Kaluga and also Tula Oblast, as well as Oriol, with their fuel. And with this being knocked out, we'll have to get more satellite pictures and evidence in the next day or two to be able to figure out what exact part of the compound was hit. Was it the northern side or the far more damaging southern side, where a incredibly large volume of the fuel is actually stored? Either way, at least half of the fuel that is within the Kaluga Oblast at this moment, within the city of Kaluga, will most likely be destroyed within the next 2 or 3 days. It does seem as though, from what we are generally understanding, that the Russian Federation will not be able to see the light of day, at least on the economic side of things, when the damage actually ends up accruing over time. And the Ukrainians also have a very interesting strategy here when they start to do something like this. From what we know, and I want to make this very clear, the Russian Federation starts to use a lot more fuel during the winter. This isn't really shocking to anyone who looks at fuel consumption trends, as the winter is a time where a load of fuel and a load of energy has to be expended every single year. Winter is one of the most difficult times of year around the world for energy infrastructure, and especially for usable fuel product consumption, as any amount of electricity that was being used in the summer is being greatly amplified in the winter. Instead of leaving the heater off, I also want to share this interesting fact for many of my American viewers. Most countries in the world do not have air conditioning units built into their buildings. Very few of them do. And so in the summertime, energy consumption is a lot less than it is in the winter, especially for a country like the Russian Federation. Because while these buildings do not have air conditioners installed, they do have heaters. And these heaters are usually attached to the electrical grid. And for that reason, the electrical grid, as well as the heat pumping stations, which are also another thing that we'll have to talk about here in a second, have to start expending a great more deal of output, burning more fuel to be able to keep these cities running. If they are not able to do that, the fuel starts getting consumed rapidly. And so what the Ukrainians are trying to do is that during the highest fuel consumption, I guess you could say, months of the year, they are trying to knock out the Russian oil supplies, so that way it dwindles down far quicker than it would if they were to hit these oil depots during the summer. It's a very smart strategy, and in general, we believe that it generally will work a lot more efficiently in wiping out Russian fuel reserves over the future, but still, we absolutely love to know that this oil depot was hit and being severely damaged. And oh my lord. Well, Matthew, I think we found an even bigger one over here. Look at this. We were looking at this one.
Look at that.
And then there's one over here. This one's like 4 times the size. We actually don't know which one was hit at the moment.
Also, by the way, like there's a 50-50 chance that the oil depot that was hit today that we just saw in the footage, that thing could burn completely down, because y'all know how the Russian fire department is. They literally have a hard time putting anything out, and especially when it comes to oil fires, they show up and start spraying water on the oil, which makes it worse, and they usually don't have the foam on hand to actually put it out properly. So that facility could be one of the other ones to burn completely down, and I wouldn't be shocked about that one bit.
And I would have to say it probably would not shock me that much either, but still, it is wonderful to know that they were able to hit one of the major fuel dumps inside of this area of the Kaluga Oblast. And a lot of people are really starting to talk a lot about what the Russian Federation's future may bring, because we are talking about how heavily tied in their fuel industry is, like any other countries, is to their economic success. And considering that they're not really having a lot of economic success, and it also appears that usable fuel products are being dwindled down at a rapid pace, a lot of people are wondering, what do you think will happen in the first or next phase in the Ukraine-Russian war, or what really will happen next? And it seems as though a lot of people are believing that a Russian economic collapse is actually going to be coming around before a Russian peace treaty is actually made in between the West and the Russian Federation. And so, Matthew, what are people thinking about that? Because that's honestly shocking. What are people thinking about that, and what are you thinking about that as well?
So it looks like a whopping 47% of the audience said a Russian economic collapse is the next thing they think is likely to happen in the Russia-Ukraine war, while 24% said a negotiated peace agreement is probably the next likely thing, and only 10% said a Russian defeat on the battlefield. And honestly, this is actually in the exact same order that I would put it in as well. I would say the most likely thing would be a Russian economic collapse, and I'm not saying that's like a guarantee or super likely at this point. That would probably be the most likely thing to happen next, I would say, but because, for example, what are the odds of a negotiated peace agreement actually coming to fruition? Probably not very high, because Russia has very unreasonable goals for a negotiated settlement. They want to take a huge chunk of Ukraine. They want to tell Ukraine to never get in NATO once again, or ever, whatsoever at all. And also, they want to basically take away all the Western weapons out of Ukraine and force them back over to the Western hands. That'll probably never happen. Like, there's no way Zelensky would agree to that. And also, Zelensky wants to keep all of his land, and there's no way that Putin would agree to that either. So a negotiated peace agreement is probably not really an actuality, being perfectly honest here, but an economic collapse, that is looking more likely. So, Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say that, in my opinion, I believe that a Russian economic collapse is fairly likely. I'll have to say this, though. It's really hard to say what would come first, a negotiated peace settlement or some sort of a Russian economic collapse. So it'd actually be really hard to gauge the two, because I believe that Russian economic collapse is still on the horizon. I really have to be honest with y'all. I think the only reason that the Russians have not economically collapsed yet is because of all of the Russian central government's efforts to prop up the economy during wartime, to stop the economy from collapsing in the midst of a war. I think that if this war ends, the Russian economy is most likely going to collapse simultaneously. And that may also be a reason why Putin is not wanting to stop the conflict at this point, is because if they stop the war, a lot of the emergency wartime measures that the Russian Federation has taken economically will cease, and with that, the economy will practically implode. I would have to say that, in my opinion, I believe that a Russian peace treaty, if I had to come up with either, because the Russian economic collapse is soon, and it's going to happen either just a little bit before a peace treaty or probably right after a peace treaty, but I would have to say the peace treaty will probably come first, because that will be where we see most of the emergency measures are lifted, and these companies will completely implode. And also, a lot of people have been talking about this, because this is one of the big things that Putin wants to see, and I'll explain quickly how this usually works historically, is that Russia wants the sanctions lifted that the West has put onto the Russian Federation. And while that seems like it would be a massive saving grace for the Russian Federation, the problem is that their economy is so far gone at this point, there really isn't anything that can happen if the sanctions are lifted. Because for the sanctions to be lifted and for the Russian economy to bounce back, there has to be some sort of a reserve capital that a lot of these companies can work off of in Russia to be able to start investing in themselves and allowing for Western goods to be imported into Russia for them to be able to grow their economic base again. And that simply cannot happen, because a lot of these companies are quite literally on the verge of collapsing because they've run out of reserve capital. They're not making any profits because they're not selling any of their goods to the West at the high prices they were used to. And for this reason, while the sanctions may be lifted, a lot of Russian companies in the private sector are so far gone at this point, they're practically like a tree that's still standing but has been rotted all the way through. And if you start to allow that tree to get exposed to, maybe some better sunlight, it's only a matter of time before that thing caves in on itself, because it has no internal structure. And that really is what the Russian private sector is really looking like at this moment. And a lot of people may be saying, and some people will say this, that, some Western companies, they still operate in Russia somehow, some way. But those are really consumer industries, and those are only companies that largely are selling to the Russian consuming public. These are not the heavy industries that actually keep Russia's economic activity alive and well. And one of those companies, just to give you all a couple of ideas here as to some of the big ones that are in jeopardy, Gazprom's actual oil company collapsed a little while ago, completely imploded. And Gazprom is the biggest gas producer in the Russian Federation. And their subsidiary, Gazprom Oil, which collapsed, was the third largest oil producer in the Russian Federation and literally caved in and disappeared overnight because it was no longer able to deal with the massive financial strain that it was dealing with due to the lack of Western oil contracts. Another two companies actually that have collapsed very recently were the major real estate developers inside the Russian Federation. Out of the top three, there's only one left. Two of them have completely collapsed, and one of them did just about 2 weeks ago. And from what we're understanding, the Russian public, and as well as these Russian companies that are developing these properties, have so little funds, no one can buy the apartments, and these companies that are trying to develop these properties and also sell them off to people either as leasers, renters, or owners, they are not able to actually keep themselves afloat while the economy is doing this rough. They've already burned through their reserve capital, and there's literally none left. And so for this reason...
And also, Enforcer, add to it the equation as well, that the mortgage rates are skyrocketing through the roof right now in Russia. The loan interest rates are going crazy, and also the inflation is going rampant as well. Food products and everything else going through the roof. So with all that stuff, it's crunching the consumer, it's crunching their corporate industries as well. Russia is being hurt all the way around. Even their petroleum industry is starting to really collapse in on itself. So with all those things adding up, I'm seeing, like, for example, a couple of Russian bots coming in talking about, what's the evidence that Russia is having economic woes? I don't see it at all. It's right there. Like I just explained, the consumers getting hit, the corporations are getting hit, Russia's getting hit from pretty much every angle right now, and there's no sign of it getting any better at all. And also the ruble is devaluing quicker than we've ever seen it devalue.
Yeah, like, look at that. I mean, this speaks for itself. Like, we've been sitting here the entire war, we were like, look, a ruble is finally worth 100 rubles is finally worth $1. Now it's up to $1 is worth about 104 rubles. The inflation is skyrocketing at this point at an insane rate. And I want to make sure to show you all this here really quickly, because the Russians were in economic issues at the very beginning of the war. This is around, let me see here, February 23rd. And this is close enough. This is right at the point when the war actually started. And the Russian ruble, up until then, a dollar was worth about 74 rubles. And that's not that bad of an inflation rate. Most countries are somewhat similar. I believe the Japanese are even worse than this. I think a dollar is worth... I think a dollar is actually worth about 100 or so yen, I believe, if I'm correct. Someone correct me if I'm wrong. But when the war began, inflation skyrocketed really quickly, but it was put back down because the Russians started to cook the books. So then the ruble was actually far more valuable than it ever had been. But that also was something as well, because it was showing rapid deflation, which is also showing that there is a shrinkage of economic activity inside the Russian Federation. Rampant inflation or deflation is showing that an economy is not healthy. Usually there is an expected inflation rate, inflation not deflation, of around 3 to 5% per year. That is usually considered fairly average for any nation on Earth. But when you see that the average inflation rate, at least in a short period of time now, just over the past few months, appears to be a lot more than that, we do know that the Russian ruble is doing tremendously, and it's a pretty good measure of how the Russian economy is doing. It is beginning to rapidly spiral out of control, and while the Russian Federation is trying to cook the books the best they can to really try and keep the economy alive until the end of the war, it seems as though their grip on economics is starting to slip, and they're really starting to show that with the inflation rate that we're seeing right here. So,
also, another thing as well, Enforcer, is that right now their budget is the actual military spending is about to be growing very soon. It's been growing and increasing ever since the war started, because obviously Russia's in a war economy right now. But Russia plans on taking more money out of other areas of the budget, which are needed to basically run their country in civil areas. For example, funding the civilians and their daily lives, the infrastructure and things like that. They're going to take more of that money and then also raise taxes and put that right into defense. So the citizens who are already hurting are going to start start losing benefits and also getting higher taxes, which is going to stress them out even worse. And, you know, I've been wondering for a long time, what exactly is it going to take for the Russian people to finally get tired of this? Because eventually they're going to all go broke and not be able to eat. That's the way it's going to eventually start going if the Russians keep going the way they are with their economy. So how much longer can the Russian consumer hold out without absolutely going berserk and protesting, rioting in the streets?
And that's a good point, and we don't really know how much longer that will be. And not only is that an issue with the Russian Federation continuing to funnel money into the war effort, but the Russian Federation, on the conservative end, if we were to say that every single Russian soldier wounded and killed in Ukraine is unable to work at this point, the Russians have wiped out a whopping $8.3 billion of raw labor activity annually just in the conflict alone, in the amount of men that have been wounded and killed. So going off of this, it doesn't really look like the Russian Federation is going to be doing that well economically. So I would be entirely honest with y'all. I would have to be honest. I don't really think the Russian economy would survive even if all of the sanctions were lifted at this point. I do think that they are going towards an inevitable economic collapse, and that probably will be a fairly concerning thing, because with economic collapse comes great government instability, and we'll probably be seeing that there will be a large amount of insane things happening inside of the Russian Federation, either from the central government against the people, or from the people against the government, with some support of government echelons that will be against the sitting government at the time, whoever that would be at that point, because Putin may not be around for long. We wouldn't even know. I would be entirely honest with y'all. A Russian economic collapse would probably be so unpredictable, at least at the scale we're expecting it will be, that President Putin may just leave. He may attempt to just leave the country with as much money as he can, and then just live off of that for the rest of his life in some other foreign country. Maybe like the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, or maybe even the People's Republic of China. Although we're feeling like the Chinese probably wouldn't take him, it may actually end up being the North Koreans if he ended up leaving. Although we don't know if he would ever leave or not. That's just a theory. A government theory, I guess the best way to put it. But still, it is a very interesting point, and one that we're going to be keeping a very close eye on and trying to see how this goes on in the future. But moving on from that, and speaking of Russian fuel products burning, it appears that a lot of Russian fuel products were burning just a little while ago inside of southern Turkey. A Sukhoi Su-100 Superjet took off from the Sochi airport and flew to the Turkish city of Antalya. And before it even landed, the Su-100 had caught on fire. And we were able to get footage right here that this freaking thing went up in flames. I mean, this thing was burning to the ground, quite literally.
I guess the fire department actually works at the airport.
Oh, yeah. And we see them showing up in large numbers, and we can also see a picture right here from closer up of the Sukhoi. This is actually a video. But we can see that the entire plane is engulfed in flames. From what we can see, the left engine appears to be the epicenter of the fire, so there may have been some sort of a engine explosion that occurred close to landing that actually started a fire on the left wing, but that's kind of what we can tell at the moment. And we see the Turkish fire department still trying to deal with a blaze. This is why you don't buy Sukhoi. We see people still getting out of the plane as the Turkish firefighters continue to try and fight the blaze. Apparently, this aircraft was flown by a Russian aviation company called Azimuth. I guess they were able to triangulate the fire with the Azimuth, A nice little...
You see, what happened is we had to redirect the money for the maintenance, Bliat, and redirect it to the War Department because we're struggling so greatly. Who needs a good wrench to fix the plane?
Regardless of what actually led to this fire, it is certain that the Russian aviation industry is once again showing the strain, as it does appear that Russia is continuing to have civilian aircraft suffer critical failures at unexpected rates. Some people will say, oh, but Boeing, though, they have planes that are like dangerous, but it's like, that's just really kind of like a reputation thing at this point, and that isn't something that really is going on these days anymore, at least. But still, over in Russia, we hear endless stories of aircraft literally catching on fire, sometimes even breaking up because of the massive maintenance failures that they're starting to see due to a lack of spare parts that can even be used at all to keep these planes flying. But moving on out of the Russian-Ukraine war for a minute and on down into the Middle East, we have been able to hear of major actions that have been directed by the Lebanese against the Israelis today, as it does appear that Hezbollah has been firing a significant amount of rockets into northern Israel. And from what we've been seeing, hundreds of rockets were fired over the course of the day towards areas of northern Israel, largely within the Upper Galilee area. And I'm going to be showing y'all a couple of clips here of the Iron Dome at work attempting to intercept a large amount of these incoming Hezbollah rockets. From the information that we have, there were hundreds. We now hear the air alert sirens coming on. And we see the interceptions right above the city, actually. And we now see more Iron Domes that were also fired in the distance. We didn't get to see that launcher on film, but we were able to see just inside of Naharia that some of these rockets did actually end up making it to their targets, which are just, of course, unsuspecting Israeli citizens on the ground. And here's the clip.
Big boom.
We're not exactly sure if there were any wounded or killed Israeli citizens in that strike, but still a very unfortunate thing to see. And we were also able to, of course, hear that about 350 rockets were fired by Hezbollah into northern Israel. We could still see the air defense activity happening way later on into the night. This is one of the largest rocket attacks that has ever been conducted by Hezbollah so far in the conflict. And we can see the Iron Domes intercepting the Qassams inside the cloud cover. And that's the end of that clip. But moving on from that, it appears that the Israelis did not take that lightly. And while a lot of people may believe that the Israelis are just doing things to do them, they do them largely for specific reasons, to fight against Iranian proxy forces that are funded and supported by the Islamic Republic of Iran's central government. And we were able to see that the Israeli Air Force was immediately mobilized and began to plaster the southern suburbs of Beirut today inside of Dahia. And here's one of the clips showing a successful airstrike.
Oh,
demolition job. Well, doesn't seem as though Dahia is a nice place to be. Hopefully no one's there because they were told to evacuate a good while ago. Meanwhile, it does appear that the Lebanese government is largely just sitting by with their hands tied, twiddling their thumbs, as it is fairly usual in Lebanon to do, as the Hezbollah and IRGC forces continue to engage and fight the Israelis within the area of southern Lebanon and continue to largely run the country outside the Lebanese government. It's nothing surprising there at all to see that the Lebanese government is continuing to sit idly by when multiple multiple countries, including the French Republic, have offered military assistance and support to the central Lebanese government if they were to deal with the threat. And for this reason, we generally are going to start moving on to a statement, at least on this channel, that the Lebanese are largely complacent in supporting and allowing Hezbollah and IRGC activities inside of their borders, as it appears that the Lebanese government has absolutely no wish whatsoever to try and deal with Hezbollah or the IRGC that's still operating inside of Lebanon at this moment, and in fact have actually condemned the Israelis for taking any form of hostile action against the rogue people that are inside of the state of Lebanon that the state of Lebanon refuses to control, that are actively attacking and attempting to destroy Western aligned countries and also attack Western and American interests as well within the region. But moving on from this little bit of news in the Middle East, we still have not seen that fabled attack from the Iranians. Many people will have known that a little while ago, the Israelis ended up striking quite critically a large amount of Iranian military infrastructure throughout the entirety of Iran, and the Iranians swore up and down that they were going to end up striking back the Israelis, and very quickly, incredibly quickly, as a matter of fact, it was going to be before the American presidential election on November 5th. They were going to give them everything that they had, quite literally everything. They rolled out that video again where they're, like singing the al-Basiri al-Assad song and all that stuff, and they were going to launch hundreds and hundreds of rockets, an untold number, towards the Israelis and completely destroy that nation once and for all. And it's now almost the end of November, it's almost Thanksgiving, and we still have not seen a Iranian missile attack yet. And it seems as though they've really started to back off of that, because we have not heard any Iranian hype talk since then, and it looks as though they're completely avoiding even the mention of striking Israel these days. But a lot of people seem to be saying that they actually believe that there's a high likelihood that Iranian-Israeli tensions could begin again here very soon, before January of 2025. And Matthew, what are people thinking about that, and what are you thinking about it as well?
All right, so it looks like 58% of the audience said yes, it is a very high likelihood of a renewed Iranian attack on Israel before January of 2025, while 28% said no, it's a very low possibility, and 13% were unsure or undecided. And on this one, I think the Iranians are probably going to sit this one out, at least temporarily, at least through January of 2025, because they're currently trying to fill out U.S. foreign policy going on into the future. Right now, things are a little bit uncertain as to how the Middle East situation is going to be addressed in the future, and not only the Middle East, but also inside of Europe and Ukraine as well. So there's two different issues here that Iran and also a bunch of foreign actors are trying to figure out which way is the U.S. going to be taking. So I think Iran's going to wait until they figure that out before launching a new attack on Israel, because they're fearing some very harsh consequences. If the foreign policy took an aggressive turn, then Iran could be in a very bad spot and maybe facing a U.S.-led response against their country. So that's what they're trying to figure out right now, and I'm with the 28%. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say that I'm going to have to be with the I'm going to have to be with the 28% to say it's probably a low possibility. I don't really think that's going to be happening anytime soon, because it appears that the Iranian government is largely scared of a U.S. reprisal at this point, more so than an Israeli reprisal, as we are understanding, and I want to make this a little bit more clear, that while the situation in Ukraine is something that a lot of people like to contend, I'm fairly certain that a lot of people do know and understand that apparently U.S. policy in support of Israel is going to be a lot less passive and far more aggressive in its support for the Israelis and really Western interests within the Middle East. That may include direct U.S. military action against the Islamic Republic of Iran if they were to continue provocations at this moment. Of course, that wouldn't really apply until the beginning of next year, but still, we are kind of getting an understanding that the Iranians may be wanting to avoid the smoke, and we may also be seeing this because they are no longer close to developing a nuclear weapon, as one of the key nuclear research and development facilities just southwest of Tehran ended up being destroyed in the Israeli airstrike from a little while ago, and may have set back their nuclear program by a good bit. So they may be either trying to lay low until they can actually get the nuclear weapons program back on track in the next few months, or they may be hoping that the United States doesn't give them all the smoke here in a couple of months once the new administration takes charge. Both administrations did support Israel, but one of them was largely leaning on Israel to do most of the heavy lifting. It sounds like the incoming administration is going to be a lot less of that manner and far more aggressive, really taking on the weight of Israeli operations and largely doing it itself from what we know. So we have a general idea, either the Iranians are trying to avoid the smoke that the United States would be giving, or they are still trying to get their nuclear weapons program back on track, considering that they probably lost months of progress in the last Israeli attack. attack. But still, we are going to be keeping a fairly close eye on this, and if anything does happen, we will, of course, be live and telling you all about it as soon as it happens, of course, because that would be a major breaking news segment. But moving on from that little bit of news inside of the area of the Middle East, it is now time for us to move on and back up into Ukraine, because we have loads and loads of news to cover in this area. But before we do, I do have to quickly mention that the fundraiser has reached a whopping $1.7 thousand so
dang,
far.
Man. It's over halfway there. Look at that.
It's halfway there, man. I think they made a song about that and living on a prayer and everything, but nevertheless. What was that?
That's supposed to be heard. At least the vocals of the first part of the song, but it came out horrific. God.
Man, I was like, I don't know what that was. Like, I have no clue. But you went, oh! I was like, what in the world?
It could double as the first part of that song you're mentioning, or it could be the part about Hot Dog Man yelling about his failing chin. Look at me.
Oh, man. And you know something, speaking of which, man, the SOE mobilized his goons to come in here with some of the most vile stuff you can imagine. I'm sure you saw that earlier, didn't you?
I did. I saw it earlier, man.
Yeah, and then when they get banned on the spot, you know they're making that noise too. They're going, oh, or something like that. It's like, oh no. Man, we need to make
I'm getting roasted for that piece of vocals right there. Oh my god.
Someone needs to clip that, Matthew, what you did right there, and actually put it in the song where it's like, we'll give it a shot. Oh, we're halfway there. Oh, or something like that.
Oh, that was so good. That was so bad, but so good at the same time.
Oh my lord, that was actually pretty good when you think about it. That was hilarious. That was probably better than actually getting it dead on the nail. But beyond that, though, I do want to say that we are a little over halfway there, and it appears that the noises, the guttural noises that Matthew and me just made, have apparently raised just a little bit more, so we're now close to $1.8 thousand on the fundraiser. And of course, I'm going to have to call up an ancient rite tonight on the fundraiser to make sure that we really get this thing over the top all the way. And Matthew, you know what that is, don't you?
Man, it is time for the coveted General Order.
Order! General Order is now in effect. If you are a member of the Lee Spring Army and you have $5 to support the fundraiser with, you have to throw in a minimum of a $5 donation to the fundraiser. That is a $5 donation at a minimum, because General Order number 25 is now in effect. And we want to get this thing not only to the fundraiser goal, but over the fundraiser goal. This is an ancient thing of the Lee Spring Army. It's been going on for years, but we haven't had to call out a general order, at least recently. And so hopefully we will be able to see that with the combined efforts of the general order and the amazing folks of the Lee Spring Army, this republic in the Western world, we will be able to overcome that fundraiser goal and reach even better and grander heights. And so with that, we are going to allow that general order to go absolutely ham, Bliat.
And it's going absolutely ham, man. Look at that thing go crazy. We're over 2,000 already.
Dang. And let's see here. It hasn't updated for me yet. Oh, there we go. Yeah, we are definitely over 2,000. And it is flying right now. Look at that go. And hopefully we will see that it makes it even a larger and grander. Hopefully we will actually be able to hit the fundraiser goal here very soon. But nevertheless, while we let that general order go absolutely ham, I do want to make sure that we address a couple of questions in the meantime. So Matthew, what do we got?
All right, so first up real quick, y'all might notice the bots are flooding in here like crazy tonight. I don't know what it is about tonight, but the Russian bots are flooding the chat, even with subscriber mode on. So I don't even know why that is, but I'm trying to get rid of them as fast as possible, but they are overwhelming me even at that. So I'm trying to get them out of here, but it may take just a second. But anyways, real quick, to grab our first question of the night, this one goes to MB Pemby, who says, I have a live chat question here. Is an oblast more analogous to a U.S. state, county, or neither or other?
It's really other, actually. It's a very interesting thing. An oblast in Russia really only exists on the administrative level, because the Russian central government actually holds all of the power. That's why Russia is a federation and not a federal republic. It kind of wants to call itself a federal republic, but it really isn't, because of how it works. The oblasts directly report to the central federal government of the Russian Federation. They are not equal in authority to the federal government. government like a U.S. state is, because the federal government can say what it wants, and it is, of course, largely the supreme word of the nation. If something is to come down from the Supreme Court, or if an amendment is to be made to the U.S. Constitution, all states have to abide by whatever the federal government says in specific instances. But largely beyond that, states have a great deal of autonomy outside of the federal government, and that largely is because we have constructed a federal republic system here in the United States that allows for such a thing to exist. The Russian Federation, however, really doesn't exist on that metric. Pretty much every single oblast within the Russian Federation has a oblast governor, but that governor is just there for symbolic reasons. It's more so to simplify the central government's administrative tasks within these areas. So the best way that I could say that the governors of oblasts work, or oblasts in the Russian Federation work, is that it's kind of like a city and having city councilors. They aren't completely autonomous and independent from the city, but they kind of divvy up the administrative work, or at least represent a different district whenever the need arises. Beyond that, though, the Russian central government really does run the show. That's why there is no such thing as oblast police inside the Russian Federation. A Russian police officer has jurisdiction pretty much over the entirety of the Russian Federation. You can send a Russian police officer from, say, Tver, and he could still be attached to the Tver Police Department, and send him all the way to Omsk, and he still would have the same arrest powers and authority within that area, because the police officers don't work for the oblast, they work for the Russian Ministry of the Interior, which is a central government function. That's very different than how it works here in the United States, because in the United States we have different levels of police. We have federal police, well, not really federal police, but we have federal law enforcement officers that do have jurisdiction wherever they may be sent, but nevertheless, there are state governments with state police that also have different levels of jurisdiction and different amounts of arrest powers and other such things as that within specific areas and territories of the United States. For example, a police officer in the city of Birmingham only has arrest powers within the city limits of the city of Birmingham. If you go outside the city limits, that would then go to the Jefferson County Sheriff's Department. Well, yeah, that would be the correct name for that. And then, if for some reason the sheriff's department was having a bit of an issue dealing with something, it would then move up to the state troopers. Or if the crime had been conducted across state lines, then that would most likely go to some sort of a federal law enforcement agency and not a state law enforcement agency, because that would be a federal crime at that point. In Russia, practically none of that exists. If it is a thing of major importance, it may go to the FSB, or it may go to some other form of a high-level law enforcement agency, but pretty much all of them have arrest powers and abilities really throughout the entirety of the Russian Federation, and so by and large the oblasts really don't mean nothing. Well, don't mean anything. It's more so just administrative at best. But with that, I hope that does address that fairly well, at least from what I understand of the Russian Federation's governmental system. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And also, real quick, just to shout out the fundraiser, by the way, we're now up to $2,714 raised of the $3,000 goal. So we are almost just a few $100s away from smashing that goal. So go ahead and donate if you can to help us smash that goal. But also, real quick, Enforcer, just to call off our top donors of the night real quick, before we get to our next question here, we're going to call off our first one, which goes to Rod McIntyre, who puts in a $200 donation, the largest one of the night. And huge shout out to Rod for that massive support to the fundraiser. Also, some guy called the Enforcer put in a $100 donation. Huge shout out to the Enforcer. Also, huge shout out to Hal Rose, who also put in a $100, along with Outdoors Del Marva, who also did as well, along with Old Warrior and Cliff H. And then we had a $50 from Ted Mitchell, Dad Good, Rad Doctor, Leor Abigail, K Dub Janky, Richard Hawkins, Axel K, as well as Greg Carrier, Skip Tracer 007, as well as Activista, Ingrid Zakan, and also M288. And once again, folks, if you were not able to donate at the moment, actually, if you were able to donate at the moment, huge shout out to you. And also, if we were not able to call you off, huge shout out to you as well, because of course, we can only call off the donations $50 and above, because there are simply so many coming in. If we were to call off every single one of them, we would literally be calling them off for hours. Oh my God, man, 300 from just chilling.
We just hit 3,000. Goal!
We hit the goal. Jaga, jaga,
let's go, baby. Man, that's incredible right there. And an anonymous 333. Oh,
dang.
Man, it's killing it tonight. Killing it. Man, I got to tell you, we just hit $3,352 on the fundraiser. We just got well above that fundraiser goal, and I got to say a massive congratulations to everyone, because the Lee Spring Army has once again secured victory once again on another Sunday. An absolutely amazing thing. And put an LSA in the chat if you were proud of the Lee Spring Army never missing a fundraiser goal over the entirety of about 1,005 days at this point. Absolutely incredible, because it is insane. And so with that, I love to see it. I really do, Matthew. Don't you love to see it? I love to see it.
Man, I tell you what, I love to see it. Another successful Sunday night fundraiser. I don't even know how many we've run at this point. It's been, what, 3 years now that we've been running them? A very, very long time. So it's probably, into the hundreds at this point.
Oh, yeah, it's into the hundreds, because we run one every single Sunday, every single weekend, and there's about 52 weekends in a year. So we've had to have run about 150 of them at this point.
Man, that's tremendous. And every single one of them, we've smashed goal, which is a testament to the LSA.
Man, it really is, man. A truly amazing thing of the revolutionary fervor and patriotism of the Lee Spring Army. And so with that, I got to give a huge thanks and a congratulations to all of y'all once again. And I also just saw someone, unfortunately, I can't go and get your name because the chat's being flooded with LSAs right now, but they said, should we be concerned that the enforcer knows the jurisdiction and authority of different law enforcement agencies in the United States? Not really, because I just know things about everything for the large part, like not everything about each topic, but a good bit on each. So I just know that kind of stuff. Like, for example, in Britain, the police are quite literally just all powerful. And while there are different police in different jurisdictions, you can generally just send them wherever you wish, and they kind of all have the same arrest powers and authority. Although that kind of technically is kind of true, not really. Like, it really depends. Like, it's a little bit more nuanced than that in the UK, but because there really is no such thing as government outside of the parliament, like, for example, there is no, I guess you could say, federal system in the United Kingdom. It is a parliamentary system, so while they do have different counties, a lot of those counties really only exist on the ceremonial level, and they really don't exist in the modern day anymore. And then for the rest of it, it either is controlled by city councils, which, yeah, well, I mean, like, the city councils only control certain aspects, and then the British central court pretty much runs everything else. And that's also another interesting thing as well, is that the United Kingdom does not have a Supreme Court in the version that the United States has. The Parliament just pretty much decides whether things are lawful or not in the United Kingdom without really any say. And while Britain did create a Supreme Court recently, if I'm correct, and anyone who is a social studies person in the United Kingdom can let me know, I don't believe that that Supreme Court actually has supreme authority to whether to say something is constitutional or unconstitutional. It really just can only advise the Parliament on saying things are constitutional or not. So that is a fairly interesting thing when we talk about that, if I'm correct on that. But the United States law enforcement system is a fairly intricate one and a very complex as well. And usually there's a lot of different questions that come up legally about jurisdiction, and also just in the legal side of things, because we had to go to law school for a little bit before we dropped out. There are loads of questions about whether something is a state or a federal issue, especially when you get into the court system, and that can end up being an entire thing in its own right, because there's about like 900 rules on how in the world you determine that and how in the world you move in that direction. So it's a fairly complicated system, from what I would understand. To be honest, sometimes it's a little bit too complicated in my opinion, and that's kind of when things become a little bit annoying to me, is when they become overly complicated, because sometimes you can see they don't really need to be, but they became that way. Anyways, I hope that does address that fairly well. Matthew, I think we were on to the second question.
Yes, we are. And also, by the way, just a quick PSA, tonight we do not have Super Chats, of course, because tonight is the Sunday night fundraiser stream. So if you have a question for us, tag at Enforcer Matt in the live chat and put your question behind it, so that way I can add it to the spreadsheet, because currently we have about 9 more questions to go, and I will need some more than that. So if you have a question for us, go ahead and forward that over to me in the live chat. But in the meantime, we're jumping into our second question here, which goes to Tikas, who says, do you think a revolution or a coup d'etat could occur in Russia at the same time of an economic collapse?
I would have a feeling that that's a high possibility. Usually when economic collapse sets in, there's a great deal of radicalism that starts to rise. Just to talk about this for a minute while I have an insane voice crack right there. economic collapse in the past has generally brought about radicalism of some form. Like, for example, in the United States, this is something that a lot of people really don't know a lot about unless you explore a great deal of the Great Depression's history in the United States. The Great Depression in the United States actually brought about a great deal of radical factions that were looking for radical solutions to the economic collapse that really happened in the United States. They're really not sugarcoated. It was largely a collapse, and one of the worst ones ever faced in American history. Franklin Delano Roosevelt actually was one of those radicals. A Democrat by political affiliation at the time. Really doesn't mean anything because the Democrat and Republican Party of around 80 to 90 years ago when this happened are completely different than the political parties you would see today. But he came forward with a fairly interesting idea, and a lot of people in the modern day like to call it a form of American socialism, because there was a lot of things that Franklin Delano Roosevelt brought about that is called American socialism. For example, a lot of the alphabet organizations like the TVA, which still exists in Alabama to this day, and the millions of others that were created under his administration, were government-run, almost private enterprises, building things that generally would be built by private sector companies. And of course, it was meant to spurn the economy and regrow it, and in some aspects it really did, and in other areas it really didn't do much, but still it was a fairly interesting kind of a radical principle, and a lot of people actually really applaud Franklin Delano Roosevelt in the modern day for his really hands-on approach that the federal government took, at least, on trying to deal with the situation of mass unemployment and also trying to get the economy back on its feet. Whether people would agree with that nowadays or not, we're not really here to discuss, but that generally is how history views FDR, at least at the time. It was a very interesting kind of a thing as well, because a lot of the major projects that people would know today, it really was created during his time. And I want to make sure that I'm getting this one correct as well, because if I remember right, this was one of the big projects that was undertaken by the federal government to just get people jobs, the Golden Gate Bridge. Which was actually built in 1933 in the middle of Franklin Delano Roosevelt's first term. This was one of the big government projects that was made, and it certainly was a super project at the time. I believe for a good while it was one of the biggest suspension bridges in the world. It certainly is one of the most famous ones in the world, along with the Hoover Dam and a whole bunch of other insane projects that were also undertaken by the U.S. government at the time. Interestingly enough, what's really wild about the government works projects of FDR, speaking of kind of like the radical actions that could be taken on the one end, we'll get to the overthrows in a second, but one thing that's really interesting is that a lot of the things that were actually undertaken as massive government projects by FDR's federal works programs at the time are actually now viewed as major American monuments of industrial and economic success today. The Golden Gate Bridge is one of them, the Hoover Dam is another. And there are an endless amount of other examples that could also be listed as well. It's one interesting kind of a thing. I will have to say that generally it was a fairly beneficial thing that was undertaken by the U.S. government at the time, because without World War II, that economic rebuilding would have taken even longer, but a lot of people do say that FDR's New Deal programs certainly did help out a great deal with the economic revival that was happening before the beginning of World War II in 1941. But moving on from that little side of things, it's time for us to move on into the other side, where radical overthrows were attempted or actually conducted, and that moves us on over into Europe, where during the Great Depression, things were very different. Inside the United Kingdom, there actually was a very interesting group that popped up that had a very radical idea of what Britain should be. And anyone who knows anything about the United Kingdom during the interwar period would know of the guy called Oswald Mosley. Oswald Mosley was literally Britain's version of Hitler. He was a fascist who led the British Fascist Party. He was attempting to pretty much create an uprising of the people, either through the parliament or generally in an overthrow of the government. He was arrested for attempts of that later, according to the British government at the beginning of 1939. He was also arrested just for being a Nazi for the large part, but nevertheless, he was attempting to try and bring about some sort of a radical change to the British government due to the massive economic collapse that they had faced as well. There was also another side to that as well, although generally that was just Like, the best way to explain that is just more radical approaches by the Labor Party, at least at the time, because the Labor Party was already a radical faction of government, at least during its time in history, that had emerged right before the beginning of World War I and really got a lot of popularity during the interwar periods, especially because of the Great Depression. And I believe it was actually during the Great Depression that one of the first Labor Party prime ministers ended up becoming prime minister because they were working on more socialist government principles. Generally, at least in the 20th century, when we're talking about economic collapses, socialism is generally the go-to answer. The United States was a little different because we actually brought forward a idea instead of a laissez-faire economic system. We just changed it into a Keynesian economic model, or at least that's what the U.S. government is working off of with economic planning. Other countries would go more towards the route of socialism. Now it's time to move on. The most famous example of an overthrow, or a really diplomatic overthrow that happened, and that would be in Germany during the interwar periods. Speaking of an economic collapse, this is kind of, to be honest with y'all here, this is actually exploring all three options: the good, the bad, and the ugly. So we just talked about the good in America as far as an economic collapse and how it goes. We talked about the bad in the UK with an attempted overthrow by Oswald Mosley. Now we're going to go into the ugly, which is the rise of the Nazi Party inside of Germany. So at the time, the Weimar Republic, which was what Germany was called, was hit with a depression actually worse than any other country. Unemployment rose to 33%. So 1 in every 3 Germans did not have a job for years. And the Weimar Republic was being run quite horrendously. Like, anyone in the modern day could agree, it was pretty bad. The government was very weak, it was very unstable, and loads of different factions were always conducting small uprisings against the Weimar government during this time. One of them would end up being Hitler's Nazi Party. And while a lot of people will always make the contention that Hitler didn't truly create the Nazi Party, he only joined it and then became the leader pretty quickly afterwards, that doesn't really make a lot of sense, because when he joined the Nazi Party and then became the leader of it, it was so young of a party, it could generally easily be said that he was pretty much one of the founding fathers of the Nazi Party. So we are going to say Hitler pretty much created the Nazi Party, because getting into the semantics beyond that doesn't make a lot of sense. He attempted something called the Beer Hall Putsch in Munich, and this was something that we have to explain a little bit more, because a lot of people will know the Nazi Party, at least in Germany, and we're speaking more on the economic side of things here than anything else. But the reason why the Nazi Party came to power in Germany was not because of its radical, sick ideals that it had underlying everything. At least towards the public, they were promoting that the Nazi Party would bring jobs, economic activity through this crazy economic concept called autarky, which we could talk about for an hour, but it did not make any sense when you actually look at it below what the slogan points were. But beyond that, the Nazi Party came in and pretty much said, we are going to make Germany a paradise and give everyone a job. That was really the main thing that they were trying to promote, at least when they were getting into power in the late 1920s and early 1930s. And so the Beer Hall Putsch was their first attempt inside of Munich at pretty much overthrowing the government. It failed, and Hitler actually went to prison. After he got out of prison, they changed the approach and remodeled it to be a lot more marketable to the public. And over the next few years, they would end up running a fairly interesting political campaign that would actually see Hitler peacefully elected, interestingly, as the Chancellor of the German Reichstag. The Reichstag then burned down in the early 1930s. Hitler blamed that on the communists, and with emergency powers, he suspended the Reichstag, which is the German version of Congress. And by that amount, he, in a very interesting move of politics, actually overthrew the German elected government and ended up becoming the dictator himself, creating a peaceful overthrow of the German government. At least at that point, it was bloodless. But later on, everyone would know that this would be one of the most despotic and deadly regimes that has ever been seen on the face of the earth, not only for the people of Germany and everyone else in Europe, but also the folks over in Eastern Europe, as well as over here, even in the United States, the United Kingdom, and France within Western Europe. But still, that is the good, the bad, and the ugly. So going through all of these answers here, giving all 3 different ways that it could go, I would generally have to say, if a Russian economic collapse happened, I see it going off of a British or a German interwar economic model. There's either going to be an attempted overthrow that would fail, or there would be an attempted overthrow that would most likely be done through political intrigue, and then it would end up succeeding. Now, whether that government that would conduct an overthrow by political intrigue would be a repressive one or not is not even really a question. It would, of course, be another repressive government, but maybe more so internally focused than externally focused on ambitions of Russian imperial grandeur like Putin is currently. And that would be really our hope, is that if the German government was, well, not the German government, sorry, correction there. If the Russian government was to have an overthrow, it would mostly be focused on internal issues rather than making their internal issues external issues like Putin currently is right now. So with that, I hope that does address that the best I can, at least on a historical level, talking about the economic models that we saw during the largest economic collapse in recent history during 1929. So I hope that addresses that the best I can. That was a really long answer right there, and I hope it made a good deal of sense, because I was trying to really cut through what at least was in college, like a 3-month history course on this, down into 5 minutes or 7 minutes or so. So I hope that explains that fairly well. But nevertheless, we are on to the final question of the segment, and then we're going to be moving on into the rest of the news.
All right, so the final one here of this question segment is going to go to Hendrik Studios. He says, do we know how many nuclear survivable bunkers are available for Putin to hide in under Moscow?
From what we understand, there's actually a pretty decent bit of them that are available, because the Soviet Union, interestingly enough, not to make another long historic rabbit hole here, but the United States and the United Kingdom, oh my God, the Soviet Union had completely different ways of going about the nuclear conflicts that may come during the Cold War. The United States said, we believe in mutually assured destruction, so it does not matter if we build fallout shelters or not. Most everyone would be dead anyways, so our plan is going to be to build up a large enough nuclear arsenal that is of a strategic scale that we can just wipe out the Russians, and while we may be dead, they will also be dead as well. That was our premise. The Soviet Union kind of thought like that, but they also thought, we want to come out of the ashes and start rebuilding. So they actually built an insane amount of shelters inside of the Soviet Union. Most of them were actually in industrial sites, and one of the most famous ones that actually, two of them are in Ukraine that I'll talk about here just as the greatest examples. One of them was actually the Azovstal in Mariupol, and that's why the Azov unit in the Azovstal was able to hold out for so long, is because they would come out in the daylight and they would have rotating shifts of forces that would hold the plant, but then at certain points of the day, those shifts would be rotated out, and then they would retreat down into the pretty much nuclear-proof bomb shelters below the Azovstal, and then stay there until they could come back to the surface again and defend the Azovstal plant. That is actually one of the most famous uses of one of these nuclear fallout shelters that the Soviet Union created during Soviet times, and you can find those kinds of shelters really in any modern Russian industry that has existed since the Soviet Union. Another one that is incredibly famous is actually the deeply built subway stations of the city of Kyiv and Moscow. Pyongyang also has very deep shelters, very deeply built subway stations as well for nuclear bomb shelters, but Kyiv's are truly impressive. They are some of the deepest in the world. And let me see if I can find y'all one of these really quickly to show y'all what I'm talking about. So let's see here. I believe this will be one of them. So right here. So let me see if I can get y'all a picture of the escalators here to just give you an idea of how deep this thing is. So let's see here. We want to get... Okay, so this is the actual metro itself. These were actually ornately built as well, so that it didn't look like a nuclear bomb shelter, but I'm trying to find y'all a picture that was taken, here we go, on the escalators, and you can now see how deep this thing is underground. It's several hundred feet underground, and that was because the deeper you are underground, the less the nuclear bombs exploding above will affect you. Although, if there is a direct hit above one of these, you will not survive. Nevertheless...
Jeez, can you imagine falling down that escalator, down that thing? You would, basically be dead if there wasn't anybody below you.
Yeah, you would be dead, man. I've seen someone fall down one of these things. I don't know where it was. I think it was in another city, not Kyiv, but they slid down this little center thing right here that didn't have the lights on it in another metro station, and they slid all the way down to the bottom, and when they hit the bottom, you could tell, man, they were going to be crippled. It was a live leak pretty much that I was watching there. But beyond that, these things are insanely deep. So in Russia, there are subway stations like this. There are also shelters that are also made as well. So as far as just shelters and number, there's actually a lot of them that Putin could hide in. But we know that, and that's why we're going to be slamming down a lot more nuclear weapons on Moscow than they'll be slamming down on Washington, D.C. Because we know we have to be able to penetrate the deeper targets that are inside of Moscow. And so we may even have a couple of our nuclear weapons geared for direct impacts on the city, so that way we can crush and destroy these underground shelters wherever they may be or wherever Putin may be hiding. So I hope that does address that the best I can. Really good question. I hope that gave a pretty good answer to it and also some examples. But with that, it is time for us to move on into the rest of the news that we have tonight. And we have still a load of news to cover. Talking about the air defense reports from last night, we were able to hear that out of the 73 drones that Russia launched, 50 of them were shot down, meaning that the interception rate is still somewhere around 65 to 70%, which is pretty decent. We were also able to see in the Kursk Oblast that the Russian Federation is still attempting their major offensives, and it appears that they are not going well, as we just heard whatever the hell that was, and it was very weird. Oh!
Tough.
Oh! They're slamming these ATVs, man. Horrendous.
Giving them the slammy.
Man, putting them in the slammer. And we see the Russians running away. La, 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 la. But then we can also see this guy right here. Just doing his thing.
He was doing his thing.
Well, you see this guy riding his ATV, and I don't think he's riding it anymore. Oh! Tough stuff right there. Oh! Tougher stuff, honestly. We got a burning Lada right here.
A whole lot of trouble and a whole lot of fire, I'm telling you what.
Man, I was about to say that one, the whole lot of fire. I was like, man, that'd be a good one. And then you said it. I was like, dang it.
Here's some goobers on some dirt bikes. They're trying to get away. Oh, man.
And they just had some dirt thrown in their eye.
Oh.
Oh. Uh-huh.
We got a little blur there for some reason. Oh, my.
We see here that they're dropping the bomblets on the Russians in the trees. Oh, man, you can never make anyone happy. That's always true. Because when I was saying yesterday that most everyone would end up getting killed in a nuclear conflict, everyone was like, you idiot, some people would survive. And then I'm like, some people will survive because, we've made this very clear. I don't know why people try and strawman our stuff, but 2/3 of everyone will be dead within the first year. Only 1/3 of people will survive beyond that point. And so some people are unhappy because everyone's not dead. And someone just said, I don't know why in the world you would even act like anyone would live. It's like, oh my God. It's like, you just cannot make anyone happy. We're just going off of government statistics. I'm sorry. If you don't like that and you have an opinion, I'm sorry, but I'm working off of the government information that we have here. But moving on from that, we were able to see another Russian vehicle being destroyed. A Tiger armored car, interestingly enough. And we can see it coming on down towards a Russian car. And we can see it just about slamming down right there.
Also, I'm typing up an absolutely juicy poll right now. It's like an A1 steak, a juicy one, medium rare.
Oh, really?
Grill.
Man,
it's very good.
You're like making them fresh ones. You know what I mean?
Man, I'm making them so fresh. It's just, I'm telling you, it's so fresh. T-bone.
Is it fresh and fit?
Maybe.
And that's
Is that a podcast?
Yeah, I think it's some like alpha male Chad podcast thing, I think. But anyways, moving
I
on.
was wondering if it was something bad for me. I was like, I don't know if I should say yes to this or not. I can't remember if this was a podcast or not.
Yeah, I think that's the one, the fresh and fit one, where they were like, you got to be an alpha male. You can't simp over women. And then this one guy was found, like, he was pretty much like renting his girlfriend or something like that. I don't know what happened with that, but I was like, so I remember the name for that reason, because that sounded really fresh and fit of him. But still, we can see the Bradleys moving on through the Kursk Oblast right here with the brought armor add-ons. And that's the end of that clip, but still pretty cool to see. Moving on from that and into our next clips, which are actually in our location unknowns, we had a absolute banger right here. I'm going to have to wait for Matthew to actually see the screen on this one, because you got to see it to believe it, Matthew. You really do. And so let me know when you're ready.
Oh, yeah, I'm looking.
All right, so here's what happens. So these are two Russian sappers that are on a road. There's anti-tank mines on the road. They're both seeing an incoming ATV that is going full speed. And so we can see right here that here it comes.
Valery, stop the car! Stop it!
And we can see him, he's like, hey, wait, bled, don't run over the mine, bled. And the ATV is still coming at like 50 miles an hour. He's like, stop, bled, stop.
Oh,
oh
my God.
Oh my Lord. And you know what's even worse?
Oh, you idiot. Oh my God. He took his comrade out and took it himself. Oh my God, man. Stupid.
Oh my Lord. You just can't make this stuff up. This is the Russian army, man. Like, this guy is telling you, stop. Like, there is a bomb on the road. So what do? They hit him and then run over the bomb. Like, it's like just a lose-lose all around. Like, you can't make this up, dude. That guy said, I'm Valery, and welcome to Jackass. And, like, ran out in front of that ATV. And then
Vadim, you screwed up. You screwed up badly, Vadim. You did everything wrong. You hit our man on the ground, and you also blew the whole thing up. Come on, Vadim.
Dude, this could be one of those, like, British railroad training videos. I wish y'all knew the one I'm talking about, where they have, like, the pan flute, and, like, Valery is told to stop the car, and he's like, I knew something was wrong. I just saw that the ATV was going, like, 50 miles an hour. There's no way I'm stopping that ATV now. But I still tried to flag it down. And then, like, the narrator comes on. He still tried to flag down the ATV, but he could tell that it wasn't going to work. This was one of his first flaws. And then the cameraman's like, I knew when I saw the ATV going 50 miles an hour, it was an absolute mistake. And I said, don't do it, Valery. But it was too late at that point. I know I should have done better. And then, like, the driver, he's like, it's just the casket. Like, they just pan to a casket at that point. And they're just like, well. But that's crazy, man. I'm not gonna lie right here.
What were the odds? What were the odds of the guy staying in the middle of the roads thinking, "Oh, stop, please! Don't run over the mine. I'm trying to save you. I'm trying to save you." And the guys in the ATV are like, "Look at this stupid idiot in the road. If he doesn't get out of the way, I'm just going to run him over." It's like, dude, he's trying to save your life, but he just literally ran the dude over.
Man,
stupid.
You know, this whole video gives that like that Star Trek spoof thing for Christmas where Gowron said everyone was harmed in the making of this video. Like, it gives that kind of a feeling. You know what I mean?
Oh, man. You were dying to, like, fit that meme in here somewhere, man. I wasn't even expecting this. This is left field right here.
But it's true. It's true, man. Like, I think no one made it out of this video okay by the end of it. I'm not going to lie. But still, that's Russia for you. Moving on from that, though, we also got to see some more Russians on the front. Some fresh and unfit 49-year-olds. And here's the clip. You know, with how old these guys are, Mike Tyson may actually have a chance of joining the Russian army.
Хуярит летящей походкой воин. Штурмовик, нахуй. Спецназ ХМАО. Спецназ ХМАО, блядь. Вот он. 49 лет, блядь.
Hey, do you have my orange, sir?
Let me back in this fight. I can beat Logan Paul's ass. Trust me. It's another $20 million contract that I can sign. I swear, I can do it. I can do it, boss. Just put me back in the ring, coach. You can put me in. Trust me, I can do it.
Вот он.
What you say, Sonny?
Let me at him. I'm going to take him.
Dude, this guy comes out there. He's like, You know, back in the day, we used to really get them. When was that? World War One. Like, it's like, dang, man. Like, you go home.
I'm not gonna lie though, like Grandpa actually has that dog in him. He's out here on the battlefield. He's not playing around. It's like, jeez.
Man, I'm telling you what. But moving on from that, we also got to see a pilot's view in an Su-27 at sunrise. Wow, isn't that just magical? It's amazing. You know, it's like
nice.
it's like a magical flying carpet. And the Russian losses were actually pretty decent today as well. Not incredibly high, but still all right.
Oh, that one Bobcat. Yeah, that's actually not too crazy high. Also, the losses, they've gone down quite a bit as well. But tell us more, Enforcer. What about this loss report?
Well, according to Miss Disa, the keeper of the records here, troop losses lower than prior weeks. And the 7-day average has now dropped to 1,409 in total, under 10,000, not seen for months. All categories are much lower also. We do not really know how to explain this, as frontline action is pretty significant from video and picture evidence, but the casualties are starting to decrease, with 1,020 Russian soldiers wounded and killed over the past 24 hours, along with 17 APCs, 14 supply trucks, 4 main battle tanks, 5 artillery pieces, 1 drone, and 1 Bobcat skid steer. All in all, not that bad, and it does look as though that the Russian Federation is still taking some pretty significant losses. We were able to see that this certainly was the case, as the Ukrainian fired an AT-4 right into a Russian's house. That's Vadim's house right there. It's not going to be Vadim's house anymore. Oh! And that guy...
I got tossed that thing and chunked it.
Man, that guy tossed the AT-4 and then went... and then went running off. It's like, credit to him. He knows what's good. But moving on from that and into the area of Drovchina, we also got to see a CV-90 on the active front as well. Look at it go. Look at the roll. It's just a great APC. We love to see them. Hopefully they're doing great work out there. I'm assuming that they are. But moving on from that and down the line to Kreminna, we also got to see what was going on from the receiving end of an M777. I wasn't really sure if this was filmed by the Brazilian volunteers or not, so I put this on the Russian side of the front line, but we'll see. Ooh, little whistle.
And that was a zinger.
You know what that sounds like, Matthew? It sounds like the Roadrunner, no joke.
It kind of does, actually.
Oh, there's another one. Dude, the Roadrunner is going off out there, man.
Meep, meep. Kaboom.
Oh, that was that movie kind of a sound, like right there. You know what, man? I need to get a Wilhelm scream lined up for these. Honestly, let me go get it.
I'm not going to try it, man. I've already done the singing thing tonight. I'm done.
Oh, we're halfway there. Ah!
Oh my god, I gotta go back and listen to that later.
Lord.
I gotta feel better about that. Oh my god.
Someone's gonna clip that, man. I promise you. So let me see. Oh, wait a minute. This is the original recording. We don't need that. We just need the sound bite. Let's see here. Yeah, here we go. Yeah, I'm sure that'll be fine. Yeah, it'll be good. So here we go. You can't even hear it. You couldn't even friggin' hear it. No, whatever. But we can hear the next one coming. That one's taking down limbs. And silence came across the woods, as Mamby's mother now lay dead. But moving on from that and down towards Bielorivka, we also got to see the Russians getting hit down E. They're playing that Among Us music in this one.
Sure are. I thought I recognized it.
They're about to call an emergency meeting in that trench. We're about to get blasted by high explosive here in a minute. And here it is. They're just getting blasted now.
Blast them with the high explosive, a little bit of that.
Man, I'm telling you, man. Dude, let's see. Gunner! Oh, wait a minute, hang on. Gunner! Tank! Or something like that. Up! It's like, man,
Come on.
okay, man, if World War III ever starts and I get drafted and I end up being a tank commander, whenever I tell the gunner to load HE, I'm going to go, load! And he's going to load up an HE. Like, that would be great.
And you got to grab your balls at the same time. You got to give them the full effect.
Man, you're going to see me pop open the commander's hatch so that way I can actually stand up to do it properly. I'm going to go, load, Shimon, like, say something like that. Oh, Lord. Man, we're having a good time.
Gotta be something like, you gotta give the Russians cookies and milk, and, you know. Oh, dear.
What happened with those Russians back there in that trench?
There was nothing that happened. We just had to. We was snuggling really close with the tank on them, and they was just getting, some high explosive and HE,
Like, or something like that. It's like, it's nothing much. But moving on from that and into the next clip near Seversk, we also got to see another tank on the move. Whoa, they got that, I don't know what that song is, but it's like the one where they go to space in the meme. But we can see the tank rolling on out. Autobots roll out, blowing that exhaust.
Man, if it wasn't for that music, we could hear that lovely exhaust, but they run it with the music, man. I don't know why they do that.
Man, that's it.
64-bit.
Bro, they really do have that 32-bit busting it down, though. Like, I heard it for just a second. I was like, dang, they got that thing busting it down. I've never heard that before. But we also got to see the Rubish knocking out some Russian drones as well, music included. I don't know what that is. That sounds like some Looney Tunes type of action going on there, but we can see them hitting the Russian drone.
That was actually about to be a sick track, I think.
Nah, I'm doubting it.
Oh, well, no, I take it back. It's like some Sim City type beat.
Bro, we building a city to this beat. It's like, oh man! But that's the end of the clip. Shout out to the Rubish. Not a shout out to that track though. But we also did get to see some Ukrainian soldiers holding back an entire Russian attack. I won't be able to show y'all this clip really at all. So if y'all want to see it, go down to the link in the description below and check it out because it was a little spicy. But moving on from that and into the Bakhmut area, we did get to see some more Russians trying to overrun some Ukrainians in this direction. Check this out. Okay, so apparently we got Ukrainian Ben Shapiro on the track here. So we got the Russians coming in. And we can see the one Ukrainian here that's pretty much going to be holding off this entire fire team, the squad actually of Russians. Oh, and he's already clearing them out. Oh, my lordy.
Jeez.
It's a Wild West shootout here.
I think the Russians are on the losing end of the stick.
Somehow, against one Ukrainian, they're already on the losing side of this whole thing. Wait a minute. Is this an interview with the guy?
Is that him?
I think it is. I think this may actually be the guy in the clip. We'll see, though. I like how this one Russian right here, Matthew, it almost appears, honestly, he's just sitting it out. I'm not sure if he's trying to get a grenade ready or what, but he's literally just sitting there with his hands on his chest, just trying, kind of chilling at the moment.
Yeah, I think he's trying to figure out how to get the pin out of the grenade.
Sadly, I would unmute it, but I hear music in the background, and we will be copyrighted for that.
Oh.
Ooh.
Matt, Ukrainian's got like unlimited grenades over there in the corner.
Dude, he's the enemy you fight against in Call of Duty on extra hard mode when they have unlimited grenades. Like they're just throwing grenades at you. He's that guy. You're that guy, pal. Trust me. You're that guy. Oh, a second Ukrainian has now appeared.
I just spawned in, I guess.
And he's lobbing a nade at the other Russian.
Yeah, that was too hard of a throw.
He needs to do it more gentle-like. Gentle Benny. And I guess this is an interview of these guys post-battle, so they actually made it out alive, I'm supposing.
That's remarkable, considering they're going up literally against a whole unit of Russians, it looks like.
Yeah, 2 against 7, and they won somehow.
Dude, the Russians really don't have a clue. Like that one Russian around there can't even get that grenade pin out of there. He's been sitting there fiddling with the grenade the whole time this fight's been going on.
Dude, he thinks he's getting paid by the hour out here. He's like, man, if I take like an hour getting the pin out, I'll make an extra bit of cash. As I get another Altoid.
Oh, another one.
Another one.
Cinnamon or peppermint?
Well, we don't have cinnamon, sadly, so it's just peppermint.
Damn.
Well, I think you have cinnamon, but I only have peppermint.
No, I ran out yesterday, and I'm like fiending like the hot dog man for another cinnamon Altoid.
Aw, man, I would do anything, including telling my viewers to slander the enforcer. Aw, man, for another can of... Aw, man, you know what? Aw, man.
This guy right here is really animated with the story. Like I can't hear him, but I can tell exactly what he's saying.
Man, you can tell, man, he's going, click, bing, and then it's like throwing the grenade. It's like, man, this guy, like, I think he actually was having a bit of a fun time with this, the way he's telling the story.
This is the type guy you want on your side. It's a guy like this.
Man, this guy, you know, some people, they say that they get, you know, they suffer from memories of traumatic events in war. I think this guy's going to have fond memories because he was the traumatic event. For the Russians, at least. Like, honestly.
When that one soldier comes back from the war and likes it a little too much.
when most soldiers come back and they're talking about PTSD, this guy's talking about nostalgia out here. Like, it's like this man's a different kind of a person.
Man, this dude's gonna go hard in those Call of Duty lobbies when he gets done with this. Like, it's gonna be unreal.
Dude, people are going to be asking him. They're going to be like, "So, what did you do in the war?" He's going to be like, "Sit down and let me tell you." Like he's not going to be like, "Oh, you know, well, it was a thing." I think this guy is really excited with what he's doing. And sadly, we still cannot hear what he's saying because there is copyrighted music playing behind him. But we can see that the rest of this clip is the interview. And I'm not going to lie, this guy is so excited to tell the story, I'm not going to cut it off. I'm just going to let it keep playing. So apparently he got one guy through the arm and it went out both ends.
He said, you couldn't believe it. You know, when I was going bang, 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 I was shaking another guy saying, wake up, Vadim, wake up. And I bandaged him up. He got a cut. Oh, yeah, he got cut.
And then he got back with the cat.
Yeah, I jumped down and said, oh my God, like, what the hell is happening? I can't believe this. Vadim is living.
This guy
was traumatized, man. Jeez.
I don't know why this guy looks traumatized. It's like, this guy actually was the one in the trench we just saw on film. Like, if anyone should have any reason for trauma, it should be this man. It seems as though he enjoyed it a great deal.
Honestly, I think this fella right here, he's very animated, but I think you can tell, like, he's trying to cope with it. Like, obviously, that was a very, very, very stressful situation. But goodness, I feel for this guy. Like, you can tell the way he's telling that story, he's like reliving it in his head.
Yeah, I know. I feel like part of it, he's proud that he did it, but at the same time, it was one hell of a thing to do, nevertheless. But a huge credit to the guy. He did something that most would never have been able to do, and he certainly needs to be awarded for it at a minimum for what he did pretty much single-handedly with the other fella. But we were also able to see the Ukrainian 98th continuing to destroy more kamikaze drones. And are they going to get it? And, oh, they got it.
Oh, man, look at that with a small arms fire, too. That's wild.
Man, I'm telling you what, it really is crazy. But moving on from that and into the next clip, we also got to see someone bringing back St. Javelin in the local area. We're going to be muting the SimCity music again as the Javelin flies off into the distance to glory. And where's that impact out there? Is that the impact? That was kind of quick, honestly. And that's the end of the clip. Still very nice to see St. Javelin making a return. And meanwhile, we did get to see the Russians are continuing to bomb Chasiv Yar heavily, attempting to drive out Ukrainian defenders of the city. And we see the Su-25s right there that drop the bombs. And that's the end of the clip right there, but very interesting to see. Once again, the Russians are attempting to push the Ukrainians out, but are having no success. Moving on from that and into the area of Frodivka, we also got to see some Russian forces being held back by a Ukrainian counteroffensive that was conducted by the 428th Separate Assault Battalion, the Scala. And they're going to be scalding them today in the Scala. And there they go. The Russians are trying to drop some artillery on them. Just doesn't look like it's going to work. The Bradley is lighting up the trees.
Man, what in the world was that? Was that what were we looking at? Like, was that trenches or something?
Yes, it was trenches.
Interesting.
Now, you see the Russians here trying to make some defensive efforts, but it looks like they're getting plastered.
What the hell is all that crap around the trench? Is that wood?
Pieces of wood, artillery, things like that.
Interesting. It's like a freaking scrapyard.
And we see this Ukrainian hanging out on the outside of the trench. We see him now scooting off. Later on, the Ukrainians have returned back to the Russian dugout and are clearing it out really effectively at this point. Almost like they're smoking them out. And we see the massive trench work that the Russians built again. They finally got rid of the straight lines and are actually making uneven trenches to make sure that shrapnel doesn't travel down the whole length. We then got to see in the Pokrovsk area that one Ukrainian soldier was just not getting enough of war as it was, so they started to play Call of Duty while serving the Call of Duty. Observe.
Просто вони хотіли, щоб ми ще ваш бліндажик підзняли, бо
They're making it into their dugout. And oh, what do we got here? This fella's on the laptop here. What's he playing?
Кривожоп. Це тільки четвертий був.
Ooh.
Oh.
My boy, he's playing Call of Duty, no joke.
For real? Is he really
is.
doing that?
Look, see, yeah, he's playing Call of Duty.
Yo, was that a MacBook or was that something different?
I could not tell. Let's see if they show it again. That's not a
No,
MacBook.
it's not a MacBook. Definitely not.
No.
That's like some type of Acer, maybe, or something like that.
But he's legit playing Call of Duty in the middle of a war.
Ми покидали, зараз вони покидають, і по ним, відповідно, будуть кидати. А як взагалі співвідношення по снарядам? От ми випустили 5, вони поки що скільки? 5?
Ні, вони вже десь 8. 6 чи 7. Та вони коли як? Вони
Oh yeah, he's playing Call of Duty. No joke. He's legitimately
He's playing Call of Duty 4 too, man. Like, he's going back a long time.
Man, he's playing the classics. I respect him for that.
15 йобнуть, можуть 7, можуть 10, можуть 2.
So we do know that some Ukrainian soldiers, while fighting a war, want more war, and they therefore play Call of Duty for that reason. I'm sure he's not taking notes, though, from Call of Duty. I think he's probably critiquing Call of Duty at this point from his real-life experience. But nevertheless, moving on to Alinka, we did get to see a Russian armor assault in the area right here. And we can also hear some very interesting music being played. Interesting. Also, David Brennan said, the old ones are better. I agree. I don't like modern Call of Duties. I just think they've lost their way. I think Battlefield has as well. I'll be entirely honest with you. A lot of the modern FPS games, I just don't really enjoy that much. Most of them are kind of meh. But there are a couple that I really do like. Helldivers 2 is pretty good. Space Marines 2 is also really good as well. But those are more so based in fictitious kind of scenarios, of course, and not realistic ones. But they're still incredibly fun. And we can see the artillery landing all around the Russians.
Upset Waffle said, have y'all tried Squat? I'm personally not a gamer. I have seen Squad, and I've also seen the gameplay, but the Enforcer has tried Squad.
Back before I got big into YouTube, I actually, for a short while, was actually in one of the competitive Squad teams. I forgot which one it was. I forgot what it was called, but I was in it for a bit. I think I played, if I'm remembering it right, I played a couple of training rounds with them where the entire team would go red versus blue for training, to figure out how to really flesh out the actual tactics and strategies. And then I actually played a competitive one and we lost, but I did play it and it was really fun. I also found some other friends playing that game as well, but it's changed a lot from back when I used to play it. One game I really used to play a lot, though, it used to be, let's see, I think it was called Postscriptum. No, it wasn't Postscriptum. It was some other game like Postscriptum. Then they renamed Postscriptum the Squad 44. Gates of Hell. I used to play... No, it's not Gates of Hell. What the hell is the name of the game? I used to play it a load. I actually ended up running into a couple of fans on that game a couple of times because I would be saying something. I'd be like, we're taking fire from like 143. And then someone would go, dude, are you the enforcer? And I'd be like, what? And I'd be like, yeah. And then you go, oh my God.
Looks like the internet totally pooped out for 10 seconds.
Wow, that is so cool. It's like we just cannot escape crappy internet no matter what internet provider we get. That is wonderful. I love it. That happened so many times last night, Matthew, after the stream. It happened like twice. And I was like, I don't know if that's my computer or just our internet, but the router is giving out. Isn't that great? We just got a brand new router, folks, from a brand new provider that's different than the last one that isn't Spectrum, and it still sucks. It's just incredible stuff. But anyways, moving on from that and out of the area, we're now going to be moving a little bit further on down the line and into the area, actually down towards Velika Novosilka, where we got to see some Ukrainian artillery firing on Russian positions. Check this out. We're going to be muting the Armenian music right there, but we can see them firing the MLRS. That guy just did the throat thing. And that's the end of the clip, but really interesting to see, and great to know they were laying down that artillery. Meanwhile, we also got to get some final information on the damage that the IRBM caused at the Yuzhmash plant after the Oreshnik strike. Here's the picture before, and here's the picture after. I'm sure y'all can't even tell that there was any damage inflicted, and that's because there really wasn't any. The kinetic energy of the reentry vehicles really isn't much, and so when they slammed down, there was quite literally nothing that really happened to the plant that it ended up hitting. But moving on from that and out of the Dnipro area and on up into Kyiv, it is now time for us to cover the speech from President Volodymyr Zelensky here on day 1005 of the war. And so without further ado, here is the speech.
Speech!
My dear Ukrainians.
Дорогі українці, українки, всі наші партнери наприкінці тижня, коли Росія зробила ще один крок на розширення війни, вдарила по Україні новою ракетою, важливо для нас відзначити і подякувати усім тим, хто зробив нові кроки на підтримку нашої держави, людей наших, нашого життя. Україна має друзів, має на кого спиратись, завдяки цьому може відповідати на російський терор і захищати життя. Є нові оборонні пакети за цей тиждень. Данія – близько 1 мільярда крон. Це кошти, які підуть у нашу оборонну промисловість. Норвегія підготувала перший транш, який за данською моделлю підтримує виробництво зброї, саме виробництва в Україні. Швеція також приєднається до фінансування за данською моделлю. Сполучені Штати Америки є пакет на 275 мільйонів доларів, і це снаряди для хаймарсів, а також джевеліни, дрони та міни, які нам дійсно потрібні для захисту наших позицій, передусім на Донеччині. Є також новий пакет від Німеччини, є новий насамс від Канади. Дякую за кожен такий крок. Не менш важливі санкції. Цей тиждень дав нам нові санкції Сполучених Штатів проти Росії, дуже дієві, проти банківського сектору. Це те, що відчутно послаблює путінську систему, і це те, чого потрібно більше. Він має втрачати постійно, щотижня, можливості фінансувати цю війну. І як би Росія не шантажувала всіх, кого може, треба не втрачати рішучості, треба тиснути, і тільки так реальний мир стане ближче. Сьогодні Служба безпеки України, Міністерство внутрішніх справ показали інформаційним агенціям уламки російської ракети, яка ударила по нашому Дніпру. Зараз тривають експертизи, робота з партнерами для встановлення всіх деталей і всіх характеристик щодо цієї ракети. І для того, щоб разом знайти відповідь на цей російський ескалаційний крок. Світ має системи протиповітряної оборони, здатні захищати, і від такого треба на цьому зосередитись усім. Росія повинна відчути, що кожен її крок на розширення війни має для неї наслідки. Наслідки у наших діях на фронті, наших воїнів, наших підрозділів, а також наслідки у діях світу, у тому, як світ відповідає. Не можна давати Путіну жодного тижня, щоб адаптуватись та знайти протидію. Потрібно постійно робити все, щоб Росія була змушена шукати можливість миру, справжнього миру. І це досягається тільки двома речами: допомогою Україні і тиском на Росію. Дякую всім світі, хто саме так робить, хто з нами, з Україною, з українцями. Дякую всім нашим людям, які воюють, які працюють заради України. Слава Україні!
And Hiram Slava. And with that, that is the end of the speech from President Volodymyr Zelensky here on day 1005 of the war. And that is going to be moving us on into the second segment of this stream, where we get to talk to each and every single one of y'all, hopefully. It is an incredibly fun segment. We always love to do it because we always get to talk about really cool and interesting things. Quite literally anything and everything y'all want to talk about. But still, before we get to that, I have to say that we've been entirely honored as Trism666 just threw in a $300 donation
look
to
at
the
that.
fundraiser. Hey, would you look at that? Because that got us up to $3,679. Pretty impressive stuff right there. And a big shout out to Trism.
No, man, that got us up to $4,049, man. That's even higher.
Wait a minute, is this wrong? Hold up, y'all. 800. Oh, one second. Oh my goodness. We just got up to $4,049.
Hey, we broke the $4,000 barrier. Let's go.
Baby. But still, I gotta say, that's absolutely amazing right there. And I get to congratulate y'all once again for getting to that kind of a level here. But nevertheless, I also have to give a huge shout out to everyone who's been here so far tonight. Crazily enough, weirdly enough, I'm not gonna lie, folks, that we had 13.3 thousand people here tonight, and about 83,000 people have been here so far. I gotta thank everyone for being here, because to be entirely honest with y'all, Matthew and me have been hoping and wishing that there would be a slower night sometime yesterday or today. And these streams today and yesterday have actually been the biggest ones of the week so far. I got to thank you all for being here, though, because while we do want a bit of a slower stream, so that way we don't feel so much pressure on us, there's so much pressure, we still greatly appreciate y'all for being here, and we thank y'all so much for putting so much faith and credit into this channel that 13.3 thousand would be here tonight. And it seems as though the channel has truly reached new heights. And I want to show this because we don't really feel a lot of stress and pressure until we look, well, actually we do feel a lot of stress and pressure. And then we look at the stats and then we're like, oh my God, there's a lot of stress and pressure. So crazily enough, just to let y'all know, the Enforcer channel yesterday, just kind of running a normal stream, and it wasn't really expected to be a big stream, it was just a normal one. It ended up being number 46 in the charts in America yesterday, which is bizarre. It's crazy to think that we're at this level at this point, where we're always in the top 100 of live streams. Literally no news channel that I can see made it above ours. That was at least, I guess you could say, English. There was a couple of Hispanic ones that did make it above us, but beyond that, I do not remember. And let me make sure that I'm saying this correctly here. I did not see a single news live stream that was larger than ours beyond the Hispanic ones, which usually the Hispanic ones are incredibly big. I guess that's how a lot of Hispanic folks like to get their news here in the United States, is from live streams, not from mainstream TV. They know where it's at, I'm not going to lie. But beyond that, we were number 46 on the charts. It's really weird to see that. It's really weird to think that that's just a reality at this point, because we were beating folks that are known across the world. Like, at least that's what people say. Like Joel Osteen, like World of Warcraft, like, let's see here. Hang on, we gotta find him.
Creflo Dollar.
Yeah, Creflo Dollar. But let's see here. This must have been yesterday, but I remember that we absolutely dominated on Megyn Kelly's show. We had like 4,000 more live viewers than she did, I think. But we are doing insane these days, and it really does blow us away. like a whole lot at this point that we're in the top 50 just about daily. And we've got to thank everyone who's always here and always watching, because while we are topping the charts these days for live streams in America, we know that behind every single one of these numbers is a very interesting and very neat person. And we love to talk to each and every single one of y'all, and we love to cover the news for all of y'all, because if it wasn't for folks like y'all, we wouldn't have people to talk to. We wouldn't have people to share the news with. And y'all are the entire reason that we get on here every single day, pretty much day in and day out, 6 days a week. Really, we work 7 days a week, but we're on air 6 days a week, is to cover the news for all of y'all. We greatly appreciate y'all's enjoyment of the channel, and I'm glad that y'all really do appreciate our dedication as well, as y'all show up every single day that the stream's running nowadays. And so with that, I hope that does address that the best I can. And with that, let's see here. Yeah, and with that, it is now time for us to move on into our next segment, covering some of the top donors in between the last segment and this one, and also making sure to address as many questions as we can before we go off air. So what do we got, Matthew?
All right, so first up, to call off our remaining top donors of the night, we had a $300 donation from Trissom666, who just threw that in a moment ago, and huge shout out to Trissom for that massive support of the fundraiser. Also, huge shout out to Ken for putting in a $50 donation, and thank you very much, Ken Cat, for that $50 support of the fundraiser. Also, we had a $50 from Mike Smith, as well as Bodie Burt, and also Charles Hazlitt. And once again, a huge shout out to everybody tonight that we were able to call off, and everybody that we were not able to call off as well, for once again helping to get us up to $4,124 raised of the $3,000 goal. A wonderful feat once again. Now, I'm sure the fundraiser will grow even more even after I said that, so a tremendous feat indeed. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say a huge shout out to everyone who supported tonight, both the folks we just called out right there and earlier, and everyone else that we were not able to call out, because each and every one of y'all has made this fundraiser possible tonight for it to get to the grand total of $4,124. And if it wasn't for all of y'all's combined efforts, we would not be able to claim another victory for the Lee Spring Army tonight. And I get to give y'all a massive congratulations and applause for that, because y'all continue to show the entirety of the world that the Lee Spring Army will never truly die, and we will continue to support Western and American interests around the world with all of our abilities combined. And so with that, I hope that does address that incredibly well. And Matthew, I understand that you've asked everyone another question as well, and what have we been able to get as an answer to that age-old question?
All right, so the question on the poll says, if a nuclear exchange occurred between the United States and Russia, how would you feel? What a hell of a question that is. 62% said, I wouldn't want to be around for it, while 15% said it would suck temporarily, and 16% said it wouldn't be as bad as you'd think. And honestly, this was a hell of a poll question here. Honestly, I'm going to be honest, after looking back at it a second time, not the best poll question ever, to be perfectly honest, but I would say that I'm with the 62%. I would not want to be around for the aftermath of a nuclear strike. It would not be good. You'd be dealing with fallout, radiation, and all kinds of horrific things, including civil unrest to the extreme. So I would say that hopefully we won't ever have to deal with that, hopefully. But Enforcer, what say you?
Man, civil unrest, more like a lack of civilization. Like there wouldn't be anyone left, really. You know, like to remind everyone of this, because this is what the United States government at least expects in a nuclear exchange. A third of everyone will be dead within the first 2 weeks. Another third of everyone else would be dead in the first year. And so from that point forward, only about 120 million people will be left alive in America out of the 360 million that are alive right now in 1 year's time. That's why generally, and also there's a lot of reasons to why that number is so low. There's loads of them. But beyond that, one thing I do have to say is that I would not want to be around for a nuclear exchange. It would be a pretty horrific thing to survive it if you do. Most people would end up dying probably instantly or very slowly over the course of the next year. And it would not be good. It would not be good at all. And a load of people have many great misunderstandings and misconceptions. We deal with a lot of people like that because for some reason, the small group of people who are really into this are like tinfoil hat people, and they always have these like crazy beliefs. Like, no one will survive or everyone will survive, or they could, by just watching the television show Yellowstone and owning a lever action rifle, they're going to become the ruler of humanity and have a harem of women around them and stuff. There's always some crazy beliefs that people have about this. The reality is just going to be a lot more lame. Like, just a lot of people are just going to end up dying in the goofiest of ways. Folks will run out of blood pressure medication and die from high blood pressure. Loads of people will end up dying because they don't have access to modern medicines or modern hygiene anymore, and generally a load of people will die just trying to find food. Loads of people will starve to death. It will be a horrendous time for everyone involved. It will be pretty bad. The central government of pretty much Russia and the United States will have collapsed by that point, with really no ability to exert control even on a local level. It would be hell on earth for a good while, probably a couple of years after that, and even still, it would be hell on earth for years after that because of the massive ecological damage that would be caused by a strategic nuclear exchange. It just would not be good. It would not be good at all. And also, I see Jason Crowing saying no crops. There would be crops, but one thing that we do understand is that so many nuclear weapons exploding at the same time may actually have an effect on the ozone layer, possibly. We don't really know about that too much. Like, it's a bit of a theory, a running theory at the moment, that all of those nuclear explosions simultaneously would have an effect on the ozone layer, and so a even larger amount of UV radiation would be getting through, which would damage crops, but crops would still grow. It's just that the amount of work that a group of people would put in for the amount, the yield of usable food that they will get out of that yield would be significantly less, and also due to the lack of modern fertilizers and also a lot of other agricultural implements that help to increase yield per production amount, the actual yields will be significantly decreased on top of that as well. So you would pretty much be moving directly back into the Middle Ages as far as agriculture was concerned, and really industrial output would most likely move back into the Middle Ages again, and then would have to move forward rapidly from that point. Rebuilding, though, wouldn't take that long. A lot of people think that, once the world gets nuked, it's like Fallout 4 or something, and it just, like, stagnates. But the reality is that the United States government, and a lot of governments in the world, do believe that the survivors of a nuclear fallout, not a nuclear fallout, but a nuclear apocalypse, in a sense, could actually rebuild the United States to its current industrial abilities within about 75 years in the most optimistic scenario. But it would not be quick, and anyone who saw the initial bombs fall would never live to see the day that the nation had truly recovered at all. Like, that would just never happen. So I hope that does address that the best I can, at least, but I would not want to be around for a nuclear exchange, to be entirely honest. I would have to give that a hard pass. But with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, so of course we need to get our Morse code decoders of the stream, and tonight we literally had the entire roster once again. We had Cliff Simonson, Mark Hodges, Earl Bernew, Kevin J, Paul Schultz, David Millsaps, Her Royal Fluffiness, and Arabelle Garbo. They said the Morse code for today says, it's bleeding oil out there, tons and tons of it, and they won't have any left, and LLT, LSA.
And that's the sound of money, and y'all got that down on the nail. That was the Morse code message of the night. Now I gotta congratulate y'all massively, even really massively, for getting that correct, because it's amazing to know that y'all are still getting that right on the 1005th day of the war. And so a big congratulations to y'all once again. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and our first live chat question here of the last segment, the long-lasting segment, this one is going to go to JMP Traveler, who says, how does Russian power plants generate energy for heating during the winter? And if it's oil and gas, then it's a very cold winter.
And let me go here and actually show you the Russian power grid. Let me go pull that up. The electricity sector in Russia. And here we go. This is all of their energy production right here on this chart. So as you can see, the majority of their energy production, at least in, I think that's terawatt hours, and let me make sure that that's correct. I think that's terawatt hours, I believe, if I'm correct. Isn't TWH standing for terawatt hours, Matthew?
Let's see, TWH, energy unit. let's see here. Yeah, a terawatt hour.
So in terms of terawatt hours energy production, most of the entire energy grid inside the Russian Federation runs on fossil fuels. Absolutely none of it is renewable. Some of it's hydro, and some of it's nuclear. The nuclear production's actually been increasing recently. And also, let me go show y'all the U.S. energy grid, and let me go show y'all that over here. North American Power Transmission Grid. Yeehaw! And so, what do we have here? Yes, we want to find out about United States energy production, however. Come on! Come on! Like, let's see here. U.S., let's see. Who on? So, let's see here. What did I type into Russian power grid? So, I just typed in the same thing here. So, let's see here. Let me go try this another way, just to show you all the difference here between us and them. Well, let's see here. Wow, they just don't have this for the United States, do they? Power grid production. There we go. Let's see, what U.S. electricity generation by source. So, interestingly enough, 60% of the United States energy grid is run currently in 2023, which is last year, but that's the last year they compiled the stats. They'll compile the stats for this year in 2025, is a whopping 60%. 60% of the U.S. power grid is run on fossil fuels, with 18.6% of it being nuclear, and about 21.4% of it being renewable energy sources, including wind, hydropower, solar, and also biomass, and geothermal power plants as well. So generally we have a good bit more of a, if you want to call it, diversified power grid, although it's not by much, to be entirely honest, but still you can get the idea of the amount of dependence that the Russians have on fossil fuels for their energy grid. And so with them running lower and lower into their fuel reserves, they have to buy more and more usable fuel products from overseas, which costs them a great deal more to be able to do that, to keep the country alive, either bankrupting them quicker or running them out of fuel even faster if they're not able to afford the fuel replacements. So this is certainly, without a doubt, going to be a pretty tough winter financially and strategically for the Russians on the fuel side. And so with that, I hope that does address that the best I can, at least in my opinion, and based off of information that we were able to compile right there. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And up next, we have a very interesting question from Leora Abigail, who says, I have a question, enforcers. Did you hear about Russia sending the Houthis into Ukraine in order to attain a Russian citizenship? And could you look into the credibility of that report?
I heard about it, but I saw no proof of any Houthis anywhere in Russia. Usually when we see that kind of stuff, we have to find the exact video and picture evidence to show that they're there. That's what we did with the North Koreans to confirm they were in Russia, and we've got none on the Houthis. I feel like that's another train hijinks kind of a story, like just trying to tie together everyone in the world into one group on the Russian side. I personally don't see any proof behind the story, though, even right now. And so with that, I hope that does address that the best I can, and we are on to the next one.
It's been a good minute since I've seen the train heist used as a new clickbait title. I guess that one ran out of favor with the people that were fooling with that one, because I don't know who the hell that was fooling, but it wasn't fooling me for a second. But anyways, moving into our next question here, this one goes to Ben Baker. He says, will the Russian ruble collapse affect the BRICS?
Not really. The BRICS is a very loosely aligned economic organization. A lot of people put way more credit into the BRICS than they really deserve. Like, the BRICS is not even a unified group. Like, let me go see if I can get y'all what the BRICS is really quickly to read this to y'all. So let's see here. BRICS is an intergovernmental organization comprising 9 countries: Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, Iran, Egypt, Ethiopia, and the UAE. BRICS was originally identified to highlight investment opportunities. The grouping evolved into a geopolitical bloc, with their governments meeting annually at formal summits and coordinating multilateral policies since 2009. Relations among BRICS are conducted mainly based on non-interference, equality, and mutual benefit. Although, I'll be entirely honest with y'all, that doesn't really happen because they are very ununified. Like, India and China are still beating each other to death in border skirmishes in the Himalayas. The Russians and the Chinese have some border issues as well. Iran and Russia really don't deal with each other that much. India, well, I mean, they're not having a great time with really anyone, and we've seen that India's voiced great displeasure with the Russians and the Chinese at times. South Africa's off doing their own thing, and I don't even know what the hell Brazil does in the BRICS. I've never seen them do anything. So with that in mind, if the Russian ruble collapsed, I feel like it's just going to affect the world economy at large in a very small degree, and not really a lot of anyone in BRICS. Like, BRICS will just watch them collapse, and it won't really matter to any of them, because the BRICS is kind of like the poor man's G7, the best way to put it. It's like trying to attempt the same thing that the G7 does. It's just that there's like no money behind it at all, and a lot of people listen to the Kool-Aid about BRICS, and they're like, oh my god, they're gonna make a super currency, and Yapdal is going to rule the world or something like that. And it's like, no, it's not going to happen, because India and China will never be friends enough for that ever to happen on the entirety of the BRICS level. And not only that, generally it's just not that unified of an organization. And on top of that, everyone's poor in BRICS. Like, Russia hardly has an economy. India hardly has an economy. South Africa and Brazil hardly have an economy. The only country that has some money are the Chinese, and their GDP has literally flattened out over the past 2 years. Let me go show this right here, because before the recent GDP stats came out, people were legitimately concerned China was just going to overtake the United States in economic output and just destroy us. And the truth is that they just completely flattened out, and they're not going anywhere at this point. So I have a feeling that it's nothing really to worry about all too much. And I don't think it'll really be affecting BRICS at all, even if Russia did collapse. But with that, I hope that does address that fairly well. And we are on to the next one.
All right, and our next question here goes to Margaret Hemsley, who says, is there a military official in Russia that could begin a coup against Putin? Who's the likely person to do it?
I would not know off the top of my head. I don't know that many Russian military officials, because usually the ones that have a chance rise from under to the point that you really don't even see them. Like, Xi Jinping was a minor Chinese Communist Party member in the I believe it was the 90s and even the early 2000s. No one would have even known his name and known that he had been one of the most influential people in turning China into what it is in the present day. No one would have even known that that guy existed back when they were talking about the Chinese power plays that were happening back in the day. No one even knew who the hell Putin was when he rose to power from under Boris Yeltsin. No one even knew really who Hitler was until he became the Chancellor of Germany. There are just a load of people out there, especially in these kind of regimes, that could just pop up from nowhere and rise from under quite literally like a rocket to the top. And so unfortunately, I wouldn't be able to know enough military commanders to give an idea of who I think it would be, because it probably will be a no-name nobody out there that will end up being the next leader of Russia. And so with that, I hope that does address that fairly well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And our next question goes to CW, who says, do you think that Rogan will have Klitschko on his show? No, I don't think he's going to have him on his show at this point. I heard Rogan's take on the Ukraine war situation today. And in fact, I actually quoted the clip on Twitter of him saying his part about the Ukraine war. And, you know, he was basically saying that he wants to bury his head in the sand because it's too stressful to really focus on the Ukraine war. And he was basically just saying, with no logic behind it, just purely emotion, he was saying we should just de-escalate no matter what, because we don't need this to turn into a nuclear war, which is nonsensical, because, you know, just because we de-escalate doesn't mean tensions are going to suddenly just go away. Russia will still act like a fool. So, you know, I don't know. Like, you know, if you like Rogan, that's fine. I'm going to leave it at that so I don't hurt anybody's feelings. If you like him, you like him. But Enforcer, what say you?
I mean, personally, I would disagree as well. Obviously, that doesn't really make any sense to say something like that. That also throws strategic and national concerns out of the window and just goes down to Neville Chamberlain, we have to avoid war at all costs kind of an approach. I mean, that quite truly is. But you know, if for some reason anyone ever wanted to hear different, I would be fine with going and explaining something different about it. Like, I wouldn't, like, most shows I would not be up to the bat to go on to, just because I think it'd be a waste of time, like going on CNN or Fox. Like, I'm not that desperate for 5 minutes of fame. We get our 5 minutes of fame every 5 minutes the stream passes, to be entirely honest. Like, every other 5 minutes that we're on here, we're doing better than CNN ever could wish to do on YouTube. So I'm not really that big of a fan of going on CNN or Fox. But if we were ever invited on the Rogan show to explain what the Ukraine war is from our perspective, and it was just, us explaining our points, and he wanted to ask questions. I would be fine with that. I would go on the show and explain our points, or the reason why you just can't do that and walk off. But to me, that doesn't sound like good. That doesn't sound like good posturing. It doesn't really sound like it's based in logic or any reality of how foreign policy or geopolitics works on the scale. And so with that, I hope that does address that the best I can, at least in my opinion. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right. And our next one here is going to go to David Gear, who says, do you think that the war will end by the end of 2025?
I think the war, it's really hard to say. I feel like the war is probably going to end somewhere next year, but then you never know. And it could end up going into kind of like a slower, more inactive phase for the next few years, with the red line being very close to being crossed and the tensions being incredibly high. That could also be a pretty decent possibility as well, but we just will really never know, because crystal balling like that, like we've always said for years, is really tough to do. It's practically impossible to do, because so many different things can change, and there's so many different variables, and we don't know what the answers to those variables will be to get a good, clear picture of what would happen. But I generally say I think 2025 may be the end of the war somehow, some way. But with that, I hope that does address that the best I can, and with that, we are on to the next one.
And our next question here is going to go to, let's see here. It goes to PsychBot, who says, what are your thoughts on Turkey, and should NATO keep them? Excuse me. Let me restart. What are your thoughts on Turkey, and should NATO keep them or let them go? And what are the pros and cons about that?
Can you reread that one again?
They said, what are your thoughts on Turkey? Oh, the old waffling Turkey.
Oh.
Should NATO keep them or let them go? And what are the pros and cons about it?
That was a really deep one, honestly. That could. Oh, there's so many good questions tonight. That's an excellent one. The thing is, though, is that to really give these things credence and justice, you have to give a 10-minute answer to it, with a massive rabbit hole of everything that's happened recently and what they're doing and what's in our interest and what's not in our interest, and then analyze it that way. But to cut all that out, I would say that at this point we need to take the position with Turkey. You're either with us or you're against us. And if you're not with us, you need to go. That's what I think the approach should be at this point, with all things considered that we've talked about on this channel in the past, because the Turks are truly a loose cannon at this point and pretty unpredictable. That would be my assessment, at least at the moment. And I generally do not like to see a country that has NATO protection largely working against the interests of NATO on pretty much every single topic. So I hope that does address that fairly well. And I absolutely hate saying that, because the modern Republic of Turkey has a very interesting history and really is a very interesting country as well. But in the modern way and shape that they're existing right now, they just cannot continue to exist this way in NATO. They're either going to have to get in line with everyone else, or they're going to have to get out of line for good. That's how I would react to it. So with that, I hope that does address that the best I can. And with that, we are about to be moving on to the next one. Also, one second here. I want to make sure that I address this one, man. Someone said, let's see here. Joe Rogan doesn't care what you think. He is worth $200 million. What does having money have to do with caring what someone thinks? It's not like I'm saying I hate him, go throw him in a ditch. That's not at all what we were saying. I'm saying I don't agree with that, and maybe if for some reason he wanted us on, I could, we could debate it, and we could talk about the reasons why it probably would be important. Well, it's not probably, it is important. That's a really stupid assessment. I
think my thing with Rogan is this: I don't dislike the guy as a person or anything like that. I really don't know much about him from a personal level, but it's like the equivalent of anybody saying their opinion. Rogan's not educated in foreign policy or anything like that. He's just giving his layman's opinion on it, and of course, everybody's opinion is pretty much equal at this point, because it's just a lot of guesswork, really. But at the same time, though, it's I can't tell if he's talking from a position of he thinks that he knows for certain what's going on over there, or is he just simply saying his opinion and what he thinks. It seems like he's basically trying to tell people how it is, and this is how it is, and stuff like that. It's you really can't say that for certain, because there's other sides to the coin that you're not considering, and he says stuff with such certainty behind it. It's it's kind of getting a little ignorant.
I've watched his podcast a couple of times with different guests on, and generally approach he takes, like that stuff sounds authoritative, but it generally is just that he's really confident in his opinions that he gives out. I don't really think they're good opinion. Like, that's not a good opinion. Some of his opinions are interesting. Some of them are, a little bit off the wall to me. But, like, that opinion, it's like, I don't agree with that at all. We have a million, the reason why we believe Ukraine's worth supporting, it's founded, in my opinion, into national imperatives, which I believe are a fact. But still, that's largely opinion. I would say that, in my opinion, though, I don't really agree with it. I think there's a lot of reasons why Ukraine is important to support, and and it generally sounds like that's an opinion based in, let's see, how would we say, it's getting too hot in the kitchen, so let's get out. And it's not really revolving around why were we in the kitchen in the first place, what were we doing in the kitchen, is it important for us to stay in the kitchen, and if that was the case, we can't just hop out immediately. It's not really considering any of that kind of stuff. It really is just more so considering, I feel like I'm getting a little overwhelmed by this whole thing, so I think we just pull out for my emotional stability. And it's like, that's great and all. Like, I can get where he's coming from with that, but still at the same time, doing the right thing is not always going to be the most easy thing to do emotionally. Like, sometimes you've got to face people down and tell them what they're doing is wrong. And sure, you're going to get scared. Maybe you'll even get socked in the jaw, and then you get panicked over that and all that. But sometimes you just have to do the right thing, even if it doesn't seem like that's the easiest thing to do. Like, for example, the Revolutionary War that created this country in the first place, way back in 1775 to 1783, that was not an easy thing to do. And all of the founding fathers of this country, if they had lost that war, would have been executed, most likely, or imprisoned by the British government for creating an insurrection and an uprising against the Crown's legal authority to control the colonies. That was a certain risk, and you can guarantee yourself that there were a great deal of many sleepless nights by many of those founding fathers, because they knew that while, in their opinion, they were doing the right thing for the people of this nation that hadn't even existed yet, there was still a great deal of peril to go with it. It would have been a lot easier for them to have just rolled over and done really whatever the British government wanted as far as taxation was concerned, and give up the whole concept of taxation with representation. But they did not. And for that reason, this republic exists today, far better than it would have in any other instance. Not in any disrespect to Britain, but it flourished much more as a nation looking out to really make itself succeed, more so than a crown colony that's just sort of living in a symbiotic relation with the British government. Far better sort of a position to be in for the United States. And the Cuban Missile Crisis, World War II, all of these things are things that people had a great deal of anxiety about. And you can think of the kind of great deal of anxiety that American citizens had back in the 1940s, when their young sons, and sometimes daughters even, were being sent off into dangerous war-torn areas of the world, and having to actually not only be in those areas, but fight the good fight against Nazi Germany and the Empire of Japan. 500,000 of those Americans would never come home to see the light of day again. And they would come home, but they would not come home alive. And that had to have been one of the scariest and most paralyzing times in fear that this country ever faced. But no one can deny that what this nation did, while it was scary, while it was dangerous, while it may have been emotionally overwhelming at times, what we did was the right thing to do. And that is largely the whole crux of everything I'm saying here, giving all these examples. We are doing the right thing in Ukraine. And as far as it may be scary, it may be concerning, but that does not mean that we are not doing the right purpose. Because you can always extend this idea of complete appeasement because something's getting too dangerous. Like, if you're in your house and some guy just keeps breaking in through your window, it's like, it might be scary to confront the guy. Maybe it'd just be better to let him keep on coming through the window. Or maybe, I don't know, maybe you want to defend yourself and sock the guy in the jaw and throw him out of the house. It might be the scarier thing to do, but it might be the best thing to do given the situation. That's what I'd have to say about it. But if for some reason, like, generally most shows I would not be a fan of going on, if we were invited onto the Joe Rogan show for some reason, somehow, some way, which I'm sure that we probably would not be, because we're just a channel doing our thing, I would go on there and I would talk these reasons out, not only like the historic points like this, but just as far as the modern national strategic imperatives are concerned, what is going on with that as well. Because a lot of people, whether folks like to admit it or not, listen to the Joe Rogan show. It is one of the most watched shows, I think, in the world at the moment, certainly in America. And so if we were ever brought on that show and we could explain these points fairly well, I don't know, maybe we would win over a couple of people, or maybe we just get logical points out there instead of welcome back Defenders, who goes and, like, I don't even know what the hell he's doing when he goes on to the Piers Morgan show, but it is certainly not looking beneficial to Ukraine support, I'll be entirely honest. But anyways, with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and our next question here goes to Andrew Honeycutt, who says, when Putin passes, will it leave a power vacuum that can't be filled, similar to when Stalin passed?
Well, Stalin's power vacuum was actually filled very quickly by Nikita Khrushchev. I would say if Putin dies, the power vacuum would be filled pretty quickly, but there certainly would be a power struggle in the background for a small while on who would end up being the next leader of Russia. That's always what's happened historically outside of the Tsar. It happened in the Soviet Union. It's happened every time that we've seen in the modern Russian Federation. So I would say, without a doubt, that would most likely be the case. And so with that, I hope that does address that the best I can. And we are on to the third to last question of the night.
And this one goes to Paul B, who says, Matt, with both of you doing the landing challenges in Microsoft Flight Simulator, have you tried Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024? And if so, what aircraft do you both like to fly? And I have tried the 2024 version of that, if I can get it out. I have tried that one, and I think the game might be having some server issues or something, because the graphics are not fantastic on the Xbox, and I don't know why that is, but it seems like it's pretty good. Like, it seems like the amount of data that game takes up is absolutely tremendous with all the models it has to load of the actual surface of the Earth. So it's very detailed. But I will say in the old Microsoft Flight Simulator, I used to fly pretty much every one of the landing challenges, and so did the Enforcer as well. I think the Airbus A320 is my favorite one to land by far. And then for the small ones, I would say just a normal Cessna 172. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say that in my opinion, today I actually flew a 747 into Hartsfield-Jackson Airport in Atlanta, and I ended up getting like a 1.1 million, I think, on the first try, which was pretty impressive, which would be an A in the old Microsoft Flight Simulator. But now they don't do those scores. It's just like the raw score compared to everyone else's. But as far as that goes, though, I would say that in my opinion, I think my favorite plane to fly probably would be the Cessna Citation X. I love that plane. Matthew can tell you that before the new Microsoft Flight Simulator came out, I was freaking getting that Cessna Citation. I was landing it like a million times at the airport at Jackson. And let me go to Jackson here and show you all this. So here we go. Here's Jackson. And where is that airport? I think it's further up here. Yeah, here it is. So this is the airport. So you come in over this creek right here, Matthew, right near Blacktail Butte. And it's right near the Teton. Yeah, here's the Grand Teton, actually. So you're right near it. And you come flying in over Moose, and then you land right at this private airport. And I landed that private jet so many freaking times. I think the best score I got was a 1.75 million, which the best you can do is a 2 million. And that was the end of it for me. I was like, I call it a day on this thing. I've done the best I can. But still, the Cessna Citation is probably my favorite because I have the most experience flying the thing. And I also like how maneuverable it is because it makes it really, really easy and really, really fun once you get the hang of it to be able to land the plane at whatever airport you want. Because Matthew can tell you all this, my landing record on other aircraft is a little shaky, especially the twin props. But when it comes to the Cessna Citation X, you are guaranteed when I land that plane a 1.2 million or above in score, no matter what airfield or what weather conditions prevail.
That is true. We've done both pretty good actually on that private jet. We flew that one probably the most of all the landing challenges. It was probably honestly, it was like not the hardest one out there, and it wasn't the easiest one either. It was just a satisfying one to do over and over. But the other one that I really like is that Paro landing, which is very, very good. That's actually a very difficult landing. The one, is it in India or Bhutan?
I think it's in. Let's see, Paro would be in Bhutan. So let's see here. Where is that? Here we go. Here's the airport right there.
Yeah, this is a tough one here because there's a mountain right in front of the runway, which is really not a good place for a mountain to be. So you have to come down really, really sharp in Microsoft Flight Simulator to avoid the mountain and also land properly. So that was a fun one too. I like that one. I would actually like to do that one in real life to see like how that actually feels to do that one.
Yeah, that would be a pretty interesting one. Another one that I was always interesting. Let me think. Which one was it? Actually, it was the one that happened today that I landed at. Landing at Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport, because I actually landed on runway 27 right over here. And that was pretty cool, actually, because we originally were thinking it was not going to go well, and then I ended up landing and getting a 1.1 million off the bat. Like that thing was butter. Matthew could hear it because it was like 50, 40, 30, 20, 10. Retard.
Butter.
And then like it was butter. Like butter. It was so good. Like I don't think I could get better than that because I suck at landing 747s, and that thing touched the ground like a chef's kiss. It was just that good. Butter on the bread, 100%. And so with that, I hope that does address that the best I can, at least with that whole thing of flying that plane today. But with that, we are on to the second to last question of the night.
And this one goes to David Tablet, who said, if the war were to end today, how long do y'all figure it would take for the Russian economy to recover?
Probably a decade, maybe even longer, because it's in bad shape at the moment. And I think we won't really know how bad a shape it is in until the emergency war measures stop and the economy quite truly just collapses. That's when we really will know how bad off it was. But with that, I hope that does address that the best I can. And with that, we are on to the final question of the night. And so, who was the last person who threw in the lucky last question of the night?
All right, and that viewer is Old Warrior, who says other people on YouTube have said that Russia only had 2 prototypes of their IRBM that they launched the other day, and have you any info about that?
Well, those people are kind of like taking some. Well, let me put it this way. I'll be entirely honest. They're getting most of their stuff from Ukrainian intelligence, and I'm not going to lie, folks. Like just based off of what I've been hearing from them versus what we're hearing from the U.S. DoD recently, Ukrainian intelligence sucks. Like I'm sorry, I'm just going to have to say that at this point. They suck. They said it was an ICBM. It wasn't. It was an IRBM. They never came out and corrected that or clarified it. They're still saying it's an ICBM. They said that the Russians only have 2 of them. That statement came out from Budanov. He lies out of his teeth. Make it make sense. I'm thinking that probably was not true because the United States Department of Defense says that they have a limited number of them, but it's probably around maybe 7 of them. So Budanov is saying something that makes no sense. Also, on top of that, it's like if they only had 2 of them, obviously they're going to test them first inside of Russia before they start launching them in Ukraine, because if they only have 2 of them, they haven't even tested this Oreshnik before, and they're not going to test fire it into Ukraine first. They've test fired it elsewhere, so obviously they have some number of these things, and they've been test firing them in Siberia, most likely somewhere out of that testing range. The United States Department of Defense at this point is contradicting literally every single statement that Budanov has been making, and it really annoys me when people here, especially other American YouTubers that are covering this topic, are taking the Ukrainian statements over our own national government's statements, because the United States government and its intelligence services are world class. They've gotten things wrong in the past, and I know someone's about to bring up the whole yellow cake in Iraq, let's invade Iraq thing as like the ultimate, well, we can never believe them again. But as far as the Ukrainian intelligence versus American intelligence is concerned, American intelligence is by far top of the line compared to Ukrainian intelligence, because I believe Budanov really just comes out and says at this point whatever he feels the best saying. So he's like, I think 2 is better. So he comes out and he like pushes his head back where he has like that double chin going, and then he says something like, like, oh, there was only 2 of them. It's a real madness. It's like that doesn't even make any sense. Like it does not matter what Putin wants at that point. Like someone would be like, like we got to test these things first, and then he'd be like, okay, but I want one fired at Ukraine immediately afterwards. Like at least something like that would be said, because they're not going to go, okay, we've never even tested this weapon before to know if it will work. The Sarmat's failing every single time we test fire it, but you know what, F it, let's just fire the Oreshnik straight at Ukraine first try. It's like that doesn't even make any sense. Like that's like saying, America, like let me do the Budanov thing. America is really desperate. They made an atomic bomb and dropped their first one on Hiroshima. They only have 2. It's like, no, we didn't. We had the freaking Trinity test to make sure they worked. Then we made 2 of them, and then we dropped them. It's like it just doesn't make any sense. That's why.
Can we get a picture of Budanov doing the double chin thing?
Yes, let me go get one, because this guy, I'm sorry, y'all. At this point, my absolute just annoyance with this guy, I think it's reaching a fever pitch. So if you just hear that coming through, sorry, but I just get tired of having to deal with whatever the hell this guy is saying, because like people believe it at face value. There's no reason to believe what this guy says anymore at face value. Here he is. Yes, 2 missiles launched. They only have 2. It's like, come on, man. Like you gotta work better. than this. Like nothing this guy says anymore is backed up with anything. Like I will be honest with y'all, I think Ukraine would do a lot better at this point if they just get all of their intelligence from the United States and just don't put like a grain of salt into what this guy says. I'm sorry. Like,
Yeah,
that's
I think that I see some people in the live chat saying, "Well, Budanov's the chief of intelligence. It's his job to spread a false narrative." But the only catch is the false narrative has to have some sort of purpose behind it, or otherwise you're simply just lying for the hell of it. And the ICBM thing, like the enforcer said, it's been pretty much undisputed at this point from U.S. intelligence and everybody else. That was an IRBM, and that was not an ICBM. And Ukraine has not come out and corrected that, and that would fall under Budanov's authority to come out and correct that, and he hasn't done it so far. So, I don't think the Ukrainians are necessarily worried about creating credibility in the public sphere because that's really not their main focus. But they probably should at least give some secondary thought to it because, the more things they say to the public that are not coming true and also that are not accurate, they are hurting their credibility, which is not good overall. So, yeah, I think Budanov should watch that.
It's just getting to the point of ridiculousness at this point. Everything he says is just not true. And also, I see some people saying it's a tactic. A tactic for what? People to believe him less? Because I'll be honest with you, every time Budanov says something now, I generally lean towards just not believing it. Like, to be entirely honest with you, the stuff Budanov says, at least for me, I pretty much discredited at this point in our news cycles like I do most any Russian government statement because they're mostly untrue and they're not founded in reality. Like any other Ukrainian government statement, they're always mostly true. Like, they're like, I would say 90 to 95% of the time accurate. So we can take those at face value, like the statements of the Ukrainian air defense and their defense reports, because they give us accurate numbers and information that we can actually validify. They, like everyone else, does their job in the Ukrainian government. And when you hear them say something, it's like, yep, you can take that and run with it because it is true. But then this guy sits here and like he is like the biggest enemy of people believing Ukraine. It's this one guy because he just says whatever the hell comes to mind and it can just be completely false. And and he just runs with it, and no one ever corrects him. No one ever, does anything about it. And then America will come out with more accurate statements, like they have a limited number of Oreshniks, so we know probably like 5 to 7 of them, which would make a lot more sense. And then he's like, no, it's not even an IRBM, it's an ICBM, and they only had 2. It's like, that's not true. Like, I like, it's just annoying as hell. It's like, if they only had 2 of them, they would have obviously test fired the first one, not in Ukraine. They would have test fired it in a controlled environment to get valuable data and information out of it. It's like, and on top of that, they have more of these things anyways, because it's just a modified RS-26 Rubesh. And it's like, so they have plenty of them. They're just not called Oreshniks. They're just called RS-26s. So it's like, that is untrue in itself because the Ukrainians want to say like this is the duality of Budanov. He'll say, they only have 2 of them, and then he'll say it's literally not even new, it's just an RS-26. And it's like, make up your damn mind. It's either an RS-26 and they got hundreds of them, or it's a new missile and they only have 2 of them. What is the answer? Like this stuff, it just annoys me at this point. I'm not saying this to be aggravated at your question. I'm saying this at this point to be aggravated at Budanov, and also I'm very aggravated at people who continue to take his statements at face value, although literally every other piece of information in the world contradicts most of everything that he says, especially from the United States Department of Defense and any other government agency in the West. But with that, I hope that does address that incredibly well, and we have reached the end of tonight's stream. I've got to thank you all so much once again for watching. Thank you very much for listening to that rant. Once again, I want to say this. We are pro-American and pro-Western, and of course pro-Ukrainian, but one thing I will say is I'm not a fan of Budanov. Just take that away from that whole, like, 5-minute rant that I went on right there about Budanov's statements. But nevertheless, I thank you all so much once again for watching, and what a night it has been. There is still 7,000 people here as we're rounding out the stream, and I gotta thank all of y'all for watching from head to stern, from beginning to end. It means a great deal that all of y'all have been watching for this entire time, and if y'all have enjoyed, please make sure to subscribe, make sure to like, and make sure to comment as well, as we do love to see it. We've gotten up to 4,000 likes tonight. And if we get even higher than that, we will be really impressed. And so with that, good night, good luck, take care, stay safe, Slava Ukraini, and we will see you on Tuesday, or tomorrow, if Matthew has enough news to make a video. But if he doesn't, we will see you on Tuesday, where I will be making the short war video, and we'll also see you back on stream. And so with that, good night, and long live the Lee Spring Army.
And yes, indeed. And with that, folks, once again, huge shout out for another great fundraiser stream tonight where we raised over almost $4,200 for the Ukrainian charity of the night, which is Revived Soldiers of Ukraine. And once again, a huge shout out for making that all possible. That's thanks to the LSA. And also, like the Enforcer said, if there's enough news tomorrow, I will be making a short war video midday. So be sure to join me for that. And also, be sure to join us on Tuesday night, once again, for the next night of War News streaming. Because, of course, tomorrow is our day off, unless something big happens, and then we might do an emergency stream. But until then, we will see you all later, and of course, Slava Ukraine, Heroam Slava, get some rest, and good night.
Yes.
The Leaf Spring Army sends its regards.